The story begins with a soldier holding a gun. A group of armed enemies open fire on the soldier, who shows no immediate reaction. While staring at the enemies without moving, he states that the only reason for the Royal Guard's existence is to eliminate those who are a threat to the Empire and its people. Then, as soon as the enemy bullets get close, the soldier fires back, deflecting the incoming bullets and accurately hitting every enemy, making ketchup spray from their heads. Only the soldier is left standing, with several bodies lying across the floor of the room. Suddenly, a clap is heard from the darkness. Upon hearing it, the soldier turns toward the sound and salutes, changing his posture. The story then explains that, despite the great technological advancements on Earth, there is no hope for humanity. Due to endless wars over resources, the Earth continues to be destroyed, and humanity is forced to expand to new planets. Eventually, life on Earth comes to an end, caused by the invasion of an unknown alien species. However, the surviving humans traveled through space and found a planet similar to Earth called Novus. They sent the coordinates across space, thus gathering what was left of humanity on Novus. On Novus, the Balado Federation was a place where various alien species coexisted with humans. The Cthia Empire possessed a massive army of mechanized soldiers. A holy place with priests who carried strong energy, as well as strong minds, was called the Holy Alliance of the Chorites. However, resources on Novus were finite, resulting in a new human war for the monopolization of resources. A soldier slowly walks through the Cthia laboratory. Ahead, a man tells a boy beside him that he is next and unlucky, as he will be subjected to many comparisons. This man is Hamilis Castoria, a commander of the Imperial Guard, who reminds the boy to show his greatness that day. Luca, the apprentice boy, showing he didn't like what he heard, says they will see who the unlucky one is. Seeing the boy get ready, Castoria tells him he'd better exceed expectations, which Luca confirms he will. Heading toward the exam, the cadet thinks that to be part of the Imperial Guard, he must be able to dodge and block bullets. Now in his armor, the boy remembers completing all the simulation training under the most extreme conditions, and he is grateful for the reinforcement procedures for perception and senses, which gave him heightened spatial awareness. In front of him stand 5 condemned bandits, all afraid and using cheap cybernetic equipment. While observing his opponents, Luca unsheathes his sword and thinks it will only take a few seconds. Desperate about the situation, the bandits move to make the first move. However, with a burst of speed, the boy charges toward his enemies. With a single clean strike to the neck of one bandit, the man can't even react. The blow is enough to send the enemy's head flying, along with a shower of ketchup. Seeing that, the remaining bandits fear even more for their lives and point their weapons at the apprentice. With all those weapons aimed at him, Luca thinks he must stand out to make a good impression on the Emperor. Remembering what he saw the first exam participant do, the boy wonders if he could pull off the same thing. Surrounded and in the enemy's sights, he thinks he's never done this before, but he must make it happen right there and then. Focusing on everything around him, he thinks he needs to push his senses to the maximum to succeed. Then his enemies fire at him. However, the apprentice uses his sword to block and deflect the bullets back toward the enemies. Meanwhile, outside the testing area, the commander and another soldier watch the boy's exam excitedly. After all that action, smoke rises from Luca's armor and sword. Standing still and looking at the bodies on the floor, the boy shakes his sword to fling off all the ketchup left on it. Then, panting and with a bleeding nose, he thinks he has managed to push past his limits. Facing the symbol of Cthia, he clenches his fist, proud of himself, thinking he has proven his worth. Returning from the test, the cadet meets the commander again, who says he is surprised by Luca's use of ballistic trajectory control. The boy says he only copied what the person before him in the test had done. The man replies that the other apprentice was a noble and, unlike him, had already learned it beforehand. Castoria says she will give him a gift because she liked him, while the boy turns, wondering what kind of gift that would be. Before Luca could even realize it, the commander already had his fingers in his right eye. Seeing that scene, terror takes over all the other trainees in the room. The chief, smiling from ear to ear, stares at the soldier, who was staring back at him after he had ripped out his eye and crushed it with his mechanical hand. While hearing the man say that he liked him because he had a good tolerance for pain, the cadet says he was glad about that. Another trainee looks at the boy, while he says that his eye would have been ripped out anyway and asks for a new one with more features. Now without his armor, we see a blonde boy greet him, saying he wanted to talk to him. This is Ela, trainee number 12. Luca, now wearing an eye patch, looked at the blonde. Sitting on the bed, he keeps a blank expression while staring at the other trainee, who apologizes and asks if he was being inconvenient. Still standing in the hallway, he is invited by Luca to come into the room. Ela says he was impressed by him, to which the soldier replies that he is in the wrong place if he's expecting an exchange of compliments. Smiling, Ela says that it won't be easy to be his friend, and that he can tell just from the other trainee's aura that he's a noble. While the noble searches for something in his pocket, Luca thinks he doesn't need to be aggressive just because he's a noble. Extending his hand to the protagonist, the noble offers him a blue pill and explains to the eye patch-wearing boy that this pill would help him recover better by reducing his sensitivity. Looking at the pill, he says he doesn't need it, but Ela insists that he should rest well for the next day's training. Smiling, he adds that he should know mental strength isn't everything. After those words, Luca accepts and takes the pill. Finally complimenting the noble, he says he only copied him during the exam, while thinking that pill is good, unlike cheap imitations. Touching his mechanical eye, the blonde says it was made for combat, so the boy's purely instinctive actions were even more impressive. Then he says that the commander thought the same, and that's probably why he gave him a mechanical eye as a gift. Irritated, Luca says he just trained a lot, and that nobility is excellent while the lower classes are powerless, adding that he couldn't let such a rare opportunity go to someone from a low class. Pensive, Ela says he made it through the selection process, but believes some manipulated the results using bribes. However, he claims he has no proof, but those accepted who came from poverty never failed, as they passed with their own skills. Reflective, the boy thinks he never imagined hearing such words from a noble, and wonders what the blonde really wanted to talk to him about. The noble, extending his hand to him, says he believes people like Luca are the ones who should succeed. The protagonist, after thinking for a moment, says that's his plan and shakes his companion's hand, who says he's rooting for him. Still shaking his hand, the boy exudes great pressure and tells the noble it's all for the Empire. Upon hearing this, the blonde stares at him with disappointment in his face. This story follows the chronicles of a boy being raised as a military weapon in the Terran Empire, Cthia. We see the trainees at a shooting range. Preparing to begin, Luca draws and aims his pistol at the target. Using his new mechanical eye, the boy fires toward the target. After finishing, the target moves closer to tally the shots, all of which hit precisely in the head. Appearing at his side, Ela praises him for hitting all headshots, saying he really is different. He asks the boy if he's already getting used to his new eye, saying it's unfair for him to be so good with weapons. Luca says it's natural for guard members to be good with all types of weapons. Besides, he doesn't want to hear that compliment from someone who hit all their shots in exactly the same spot, while the noble smiled. The cadet tells the blonde he will surpass him, and Ela, smiling, replies that he'd be happy, since as he said before, he's rooting for him. Looking at his hand, the young man says that talent's value has been lost in the Empire, since anyone with status and power is considered talented. However, if more irregular talents like Luca appear, it will be easier to tell who truly has talent and who doesn't. Serious, the boy tells the other that he's criticizing the Empire, and that if he reported him, even as a noble, he wouldn't get away with it. The blonde smiles. Turning his back, the noble says he knows his companion is a good person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have warned him about reporting. Thanking the cadet for worrying about him, meanwhile, Luca handles his weapon, calling Ela annoying. 2 years later, we see 2 combat vehicles speeding ahead. Inside one of them, Cthia tells everyone that Luca and Ela will be the platonic leaders of that training. And he continues by saying that anyone who doesn't agree can stand up and leave, while the trainees only stare at him. He warns everyone that after the canyon, there is an illegal Korate outpost within their territory, and that the training is meant to test them. This was a battlefield, so he orders them not to bring back any prisoners but to finish off everyone there on the spot. Outside the vehicle, the blonde says it's his first real mission, and Luca, asking if he's nervous, says he's already destroyed someone in training before. However, he remembers that this is the first mission against an external force. Looking at the blonde, the soldier tells him not to get lost in his emotions. Noticing a senior guard behind them, the protagonist wonders if anyone thinks the guard is there to protect them. The senior guard was using a legion and had his whole body mechanized. Luca says he believes the guard is there to supervise them and could even destroy them if they don't follow the commander's orders, explaining that in Novus the other forces are insects compared to the Empire, and everyone uses it for their own benefit. Ela activates his mechanical eye and tells his companion that he knows that very well because that's exactly what he was taught, while watching a little girl handing a flower to her mother near the illegal base. Now in a chaotic scene, we see the soldier walking among bodies and fire. While a siren wails and the other cadets keep taking down targets, Luca thinks that apparently none of the targets there are armed. Because of that, the training should end without any problems. Amidst the fire and chaos, the boy comes across a child leaning against a wall, trembling in fear. The child is calling for her mother in the midst of all that terror. Seeing that the child can't even move from fear, the protagonist becomes uneasy, thinking that if the child had a weapon, it would be much easier to act in that situation. However, the trainee quickly remembers his commander's order. As he prepares for the strike, Luca thinks he must not hesitate, since they are only insects who stole the Empire's resources, and with a sword strike, he slashes through the wall where the child is. But the attack does not hit the little one, instead passing right by her head. Surprised to still be alive, the child hears the soldier telling her to pretend to be unconscious, as that might be the only way to survive. The boy knew he shouldn't be doing that, because he feared what would happen to him if the Empire found out. While thinking if he should go back and take care of the situation, the target is struck by a bullet. Startled, Luca looks up at a tower in front of them and sees another soldier. The soldier was Ela, who had fired a shot and was shaking his head at his companion, telling him not to do that again. The boy, desperate, wonders since when Ela had been there and if he had seen everything. As they lock eyes, Luca thinks that the noble wouldn't report him, but if it were another trainee, it would be different. Thinking he should keep an eye on the blonde, the soldier doesn't notice a blue power being channeled behind him. The power explodes at the top of the tower where his companion was, leaving the boy worried, shouting Ela's name. The trainee sees the man who had attacked, and that same man yells for the accretions to go to hell while conjuring a new power. Staring at the man, Luca wonders if it was him who caused that recent explosion. As another cadet approaches from behind him, the boy thinks that if it was him, it can only mean one thing. While the other soldier rushes toward the opponent from behind, he is quickly blown apart by that same power. Seeing this, the cadet becomes alarmed and confirms his suspicion that the man is a force user. The furious enemy shouts that this was not a base, but a village, and that the people here lived their lives normally. Now with reinforcements, Luca wonders if the captain already knew about that. Lying on the ground without half his body, Ela tells his companion that he let his guard down and has no excuse. Guilty for hesitating, the boy remembers having learned how to deal with a force user and says he will make up for his mistake. He tells the other soldiers to take control of the base while he deals with the man, and upon hearing this, the trainees obey. Then the opponent points his magic charged hand at him, asking where they think they're going. Luca thinks it's just a ploy to buy time for his allies to escape, and recalls that force users always perform a preparatory action, which in that case were hand signals. If he could detect a disturbance in space, he could react to the explosions. Then he advanced toward the enemy, dodging his spells. Kurita's nose began to bleed due to excessive use of the force. Still pushing forward, Luca thought he had no other choice, even if his body collapsed from the continuous use of high speed. He needed to keep attacking even faster, he said as he closed in on the enemy's magic. With his extreme speed, he managed to get face to face with the man and prepared to deliver a sword strike. The irritated opponent panicked upon seeing that the soldier had gotten so close. Taking advantage of the short distance, the boy delivered a sword strike to Kurita's chest, thinking he had won. However, the man still managed to bring his hand close to Luca's face, using the force on his head. The soldier, caught off guard, had half his helmet destroyed and wondered if this was his end. But with the sword still in his chest, when the enemy saw the boy's face, he hesitated, crying as he said he was just a child. Taking advantage of the enemy's hesitation, Luca used his other hand to drive his sword even deeper into his chest, dragging him across the ground and finally winning. Panting, the cadet stared at the enemy's body on the ground, surrounded by ketchup. Seeing his helmet destroyed halfway, he thought that if the man hadn't hesitated, he would have been done for. Luca wondered why the enemy had failed to finish him, since the Kurita alliance was made up of extremist fanatics. Remembering he had been taught not to let emotions consume him during battle, he said it was all for the Empire. The only reason for the Royal Guard's existence was to eliminate threats to the Empire and its people, he thought. As he looked at the chaotic scene before him, hearing screams of despair amidst the destruction, already in the Akrisha hospital room, Luca floated in the water, staring at the ceiling, while Ela asked him how it felt to almost kick the bucket. Replying to the blonde in the pool beside him, the boy said for him to answer that himself since he was the one who almost died. Feeling smug because he had received new parts, the blonde asked if his friend had gotten anything. He replied that he had gotten titanium bones and artificial skin, and said that in a few years he would have a completely new body. Then the noble said he thought the chief knew about the force user, while explaining that they didn't know because it was a test, and that the seniors didn't help because they didn't think it was necessary. However, Ela said it was strange that he and the other cadet who was hit by the force's power survived. It didn't seem like a coincidence. So maybe the force user had no intention of killing them from the start, leaving Luca pensive. The boy, remembering what the man had said to him, thought it was the enemy's mistake to let him live, since he was a soldier of the Empire. That pathetic mercy was the reason why the Kuritas kept being wiped out, the soldier thought angrily. Suddenly, the blonde turned and asked him why he had turned a blind eye to that Kurita child, catching the cadet off guard. Still looking at Luca, Ela asked if he could answer why. Hearing that, the young man turned to face the opposite side, saying he talked too much and asking if he had grown a new tongue. With a guilty and regretful expression, he replied that it had been a mistake and that it would never happen again. A man with glasses said that the trainees had now completed 2 of the 4 years of Imperial Guard training, and that they should serve as models for the younger recruits, especially Luca and Ela, as the top 1 and 2 of the troop. He also said that the 2 could become Centurions of the Empire in the future, for the glory of the Empire. In the Imperial Guard, for every 1,000 guards, there are 10 sentries commanded by a single chief Centurion. With the man in glasses leaving, Luca thought that after the cadets complete body mechanization, they would go to the 10th century. Even though it was known as the lowest ranked century, if he could get into it, it would be very good for him. 2 soldiers were sparring in a training arena. Ela prepared to throw a direct punch with his mechanized arm. However, his opponent used his guard to block the blow. Exchanging strikes, the 2 continued training for a while. Noticing the opponent's improvement, Luca thought the noble had gotten stronger with his new arm, but he unbalanced the blonde with a kick to his supporting leg, making him fall forward. Taking advantage of the position, the boy prepared to deliver a direct blow to Ela's face. Stopping the strike just before hitting him, he told the other that this round marked 124 rounds and 124 victories. After the training, the 2 are sitting and looking at the stars when Ela says he thought he would win this time. Luca replies that getting a few new parts isn't everything, while the blonde says he seems stiffer after the speech about the Centurion. Confirming, the boy says he wishes he had more experience as an Imperial Guard, and the noble asks why he doesn't relax a little. Looking at his companion, the soldier answers that unlike Ela, he has no place to return to, which is why he must always surpass himself. He also says that his friend has talent but lives without motivation, and asks why he wanted to become a guardian. The blonde smiles while looking at the sky and says that he actually wanted to be an archaeologist to study the ancient arcane civilization. Luca asks him why he doesn't do that. He replies that the subject is banned by the Empire, and besides, his family wouldn't accept it. The protagonist calls his companion spoiled if he's upset about that, since the poor don't even know if they'll manage to eat. The blonde already knew Luca would say that, and says he was just sharing a secret with his friend, but the soldier gives him a warning. That could sound like criticism of the Empire, and the blonde would be in trouble if someone reported him. Ela tells Luca that he also keeps one of his secrets, and the boy says he only hesitated because his opponent wasn't a combatant. Staring at the noble, the soldier says he is loyal to the Empire for recognizing its strength, and that the Empire's enemies are his as well. Then he warns that the cadet is no exception to that, and the blonde smiles upon hearing those words. As he climbs down from the wall, he calls the boy a liar. Looking at Luca, Ela says that if his devotion to the Empire were truly fanatical, he would have already tried to kill him. Walking away, he tells his friend not to be so hard on himself, and with an annoyed expression, Luca calls the other an idiot, saying that if he keeps that up, he's going to get himself screwed. A year later, in an uninhabited neutral arcane zone, the soldiers are on a reconnaissance mission. Someone with his hand on the wall says this is a mystical place, pointing out that besides the wall emitting energy, it is millions of years old. Smiling excitedly with sparkling eyes, it was Ela. Looking back, he asks if it isn't cool, saying that civilizations existed that explored the stars before humans even existed. Worried, Luca thinks that even after his warning, the noble didn't hesitate to cross the line. Remembering the mission, the boy tells Ela to be more careful, because they will have to fight if they encounter an enemy. However, excited and not listening, his companion says that some Imperial Guard will come to save them, making the protagonist uneasy. Someone approaches them, saying that the present exists because of the past, and that ancient records could allow them to foresee the future. That's why it made sense to be interested in history. That was Claude Ramon's, another noble cadet. With white hair and red eyes, Claude says he likes Luca, and asks if he is dating someone. Taking a combat stance, the soldier says he would consider him a threat if he came any closer. Claude asks him to calm down, saying he only wanted to introduce him to his sister, since he will probably become her superior. Then he asks him to think about the idea, while Ela, laughing, says Luca is popular, and Luca tells him to shut up. Suddenly they feel something. Entering combat formation, the leader says that he and Claude will be at the front, while Ela's group will provide support. Noticing a bright light among the trees, he tries to figure out what it is. With a glowing cube above its head, the shadow remains still. Eyes widening in terror, Luca recognizes that shadow. It was a Korite paladin wearing an elegant silver armor. Sensing their presence, the paladin turns toward them. The 2 trainees panic, thinking they had been hidden. Raising his arm, the paladin conjures a kind of sharp spear surrounded by force, pointing it at the soldiers. Seeing that power, Luca desperately yells for Claude to run. However, the knight hurls his attack toward them at incredible speed. Unable to react, the boy sees his companion take the enemy's strike head-on. Thrown backward, Claude sprays ketchup. Terrified by what just happened, the cadet shouts his friend's name. Meanwhile, the paladin stands still after the attack. The spear thrown by the knight strikes the wall of the ancient pillar. Using the force, the paladin once again envelops the spear with his power, extending his hand, making the spear fly directly back into his grasp. Still frozen in place, Luca stares at Claude's trembling body on the ground. Remembering the conversation he had with him earlier, the boy is horrified at what's left of him. The boy thought he had seen the spear shine, but it was so fast that now half of his companion's body was already gone. Trying to use his mechanical eye, Luca panicked because he couldn't. Staring at the paladin who still had his hand extended toward him, he begged for his eye to work and calculate the spear's trajectory. Then gunfire was directed at the knight, who defended himself with a shield. It was Ela and his team advancing toward Luca and shouting for him to regroup. Still aiming their weapons at the paladin, the blonde said it was time to fight and buy time, and told the soldier not to stand still. Luca, knowing he was right because they couldn't escape this situation, thought there was only one thing to do. Unsheathing his red sword, he prepared to fight until the Imperial Guard could reach them. As he remembered the senior, he thought he only needed to buy time until a guard arrived to help them. The two stared each other down as the race against time began. The paladin fired his spear again toward Luca, who managed to partially dodge it, causing the spear to graze him and destroy half of his helmet. The knight quickly used the force, making the spear change trajectory and head toward the boy from behind. When he saw the spear coming rapidly toward him, Luca thought he wouldn't have time to dodge. Then he remembered the near-death sensation and Commander Castoria saying the Imperial Guard didn't need weaklings. Remembering that, he repositioned himself and drew his sword to defend, managing to make the sword collide with the spear while thinking he needed to attack before the paladin could move. With the collision, the force around the spear broke. Then an explosion occurred, kicking up dust and making Ela worried as he shouted for Luca. A piece of the soldier's sword was flung far away, spinning before embedding itself in the ground. Still standing after the explosion, he found himself disarmed and unable to use his hand, which had been destroyed when blocking the spear's attack. Facing the paladin standing before him, the boy had to prepare for the next strike. The knight, this time gripping the hilt of his sword, emitted a blue aura across his body. In a swift motion, he swung his sword, unleashing 3 slashes forming a triangle toward the trainees. Luca barely dodged, but ended up having his right arm cut. Yet the blow continued, striking the other soldiers behind the protagonist and cutting them all down. Seeing that the paladin hadn't been aiming at him, the cadet looked back and shouted for his friend who had been struck. Taking advantage of Luca's opening, the Kurita advanced rapidly toward him. Terrified and unwilling to meet his end there, the boy saw no way out. Not knowing what to do, in a moment of desperation, the soldier shouted and leaped toward the paladin, who prepared to strike again. Meanwhile, in the forest, someone was approaching the situation, using propulsion to increase speed. Advancing faster than before, the red-cloaked guard headed deeper into the forest. As he drew closer, he could see Luca disarmed and missing an arm, and the paladin moving toward him. When they were about to collide, the boy saw the paladin's head being grabbed right in front of him. Startled since he hadn't seen the guard arrive, he looked, trying to understand what had happened. Realizing then that the Imperial Guard had finally arrived to save them, the guard slammed the paladin to the ground while still gripping his head. Increasing the propulsion of his leg, he scraped and dragged the paladin's head along the ground. While doing this with one hand, with the other he drew his pistol and aimed at the knight's back, firing multiple shots while continuing to drag his head across the ground. Seeing the ancestral pillar, the Imperial Guard turned and hurled the paladin toward it, causing an explosion on impact. From a distance, Luca saw the pillar vibrate from the force of the blow, breathing heavily and still unable to believe he had survived. Amid all the dust and smoke, the guard approached the boy. When he got closer and emerged from the smoke, the soldier finally confirmed it was a senior. Shouting loudly, he became euphoric, for now he was finally safe with the Imperial Guard there. However, behind the guard, the paladin braced his sword on the ground, trying to stand again. Looking back and exuding a red aura, the senior stared at the knight, who glared back through his cracked mask. Now facing the paladin, the guard prepared for a new battle, while the knight leaned on his sword, trying to stand and fight again. Grabbing his axe, the senior pointed it toward the paladin. Watching from a distance, Luca, panting, thinks about that battle, an Imperial Guard with the Legion against a holy knight wielding the force. Meanwhile, the two prepare to strike at each other, and the boy wonders which side is stronger. Their weapons clashed, causing a blinding flash and a massive shockwave. They lock eyes, engaging in a raw contest of strength. The cloudy sky looms as the two opponents trade blows while fighting in midair. In the middle of the forest, a massive explosion caused by them can be seen from afar. In an unrelenting exchange of strikes, neither gives the other any room to breathe. Watching this, Luca thinks that this is what it looks like when a senior fights, so fast you can't even track the path of his weapon. While the two keep fighting, the boy prays for the guard to win. Landing a powerful blow, the guard uses his weapon's propulsion to amplify his strike, shattering the paladin's weapon into pieces. Seizing the opportunity, the senior grabs the knight by the head again, activating the propulsion of his mechanized arm, thus creating immense pressure against the opponent's skull. However, while the guard grips his helmet, the paladin uses the force on his finger to coat the spear. The spear, which had been lodged in the ground behind Luca, becomes enveloped in the force again. Realizing this, the boy looks at the spear with a fearful expression. Remembering Claude, he thinks the senior has no idea of the weapon's speed and power and won't be able to react in time. Missing an arm and desperate, Luca knows that if the guard loses, it will also be his own end. Shifting his foot, the soldier searches for a way to prevent it. When the spear shoots out of the ground toward the senior, the cadet throws his leg in front of it, which is torn clean off. Praying for it to miss its mark, all that's left is to wait. While still holding the enemy's head, the guard notices the spear coming his way, grazing past him. With the spear missing, the paladin grabs the guard's axe and channels the force into his hand. Seeing what the knight intends, the guard releases his weapon and clenches his fist to punch the enemy. As the paladin intensifies the force in his hand, the senior hurls his fist with full power toward him, landing a crushing punch to the paladin's head and slamming him into the ground, causing a massive explosion. Amid the debris of the blast, Luca lies panting, missing his right arm and leg. Too weak to move closer and see the outcome, he wonders who has won. Sensing someone approaching, he prays that it's the Imperial Guard. Still with his eyes closed, the boy hears the person beside him say he did a good job. Saying they managed to get rid of the paladin thanks to him, he asks if Luca has any wounds on his abdomen. The soldier says he was wounded while trying to dodge the paladin's forced slash, and the guard says he'll help him back to base. Looking at the guard, Luca is both shocked and disturbed. Legion, a full-body mechanical armor that removes all unnecessary parts for combat and can turn you into the ultimate weapon. Every trainee's dream is to receive it. Looking at the senior as he extends his hand, Luca notices he has no head. Then saying that he's alive but without a brain, he questions whether he's a machine or a human. With an eerie voice, the guard, who hadn't realized it yet, tries to find his head, wondering if it's truly gone. Upon realizing his head is missing, the guard lets out a desperate scream, then falling to his knees, showing no sign of life. Seeing this, Luca wonders if he had been trying to become such a monster all along. Looking at his own body, he notices he's trembling and cold, wondering if he'll survive until help arrives. Lying on the ground with the lifeless guard's armor beside him, he wonders if this is the last thing he'll ever see. However, someone approaches and asks Luca if he's okay. It's Ela, who had also survived the paladin's attacks and had come to find his friend. The soldier asks his companion about the others, who replies that everyone else is dead except for the two of them. While sitting next to the guard, the blonde asks the protagonist how bad his injuries are, and Luca says he'll meet his end soon. Still lying down, Luca asks his friend what he plans to do now, surprising him with the question. He also says that the life he always wanted is right in front of his eyes, while Ela just listens and says nothing. Looking toward the horizon, the cadet told his friend that what he desired could not be achieved within the Empire. Sweating cold, he said that if that was truly his wish, the noble should go to Corate or Balado to fulfill his dream. Still without answering, his friend heard that as soon as reinforcements arrived, they would have to return to the Empire, so he should hurry. After a short while, the blonde stood up. Panting and losing his strength, Luca looked at his friend, who was walking toward the forest, and thought that any citizen of the Empire would envy Ela for having a family like his. Remembering that night they had watched the stars, he thought he couldn't understand his friend. However, when he spoke about his dreams, that was when his eyes shone the brightest. So from the bottom of his heart, he hoped his friend could live the way he wanted, closing his eyes. Suddenly, he felt someone pressing a cloth against his severed arm. When he opened his eyes, he saw it was Ela, and asked what that idiot was doing. Smiling, his friend said that seeing the way he was acting had made him worry whether he would actually die there, saying that he couldn't live with a clear conscience if Luca lost his life that way. The boy sighed, thinking his friend was an idiot as he saw the rescue craft approaching them. Reading a comic book about the invasion of a starship was Luca, sitting and focused on his reading. Then Ela, arriving by surprise, asked if his friend was looking for new parts, startling him. Pointing at the magazine, he said he recommended the F-24 model, which adapted quickly and was much better than what he had. Luca closed the magazine and placed it on the seat, looking at his friend and telling him to stop scaring him like that, to which he then apologized. After returning to the Empire and receiving treatment, the soldier was investigated by different departments regarding the case in which 3 cadets and a guard lost their lives, calling the incident the encounter with the Corita Paladin. But that was what Luca thought. In truth, he had been called in for other reasons, and Ela said that an artifact had been found at the scene. Remembering the incident, the boy thought of the floating cube near the paladin and suspected it was the cause of everything. Looking at the blonde, Luca asked who would collect the artifact, and his friend replied he had heard they sent a team of specialists. Then, with a tense expression, the noble said that if the Alliance refused to hand over the artifact and the site, a great war would break out, and if the Empire fought against the Caritas, Balada would benefit without lifting a finger. That was why several smaller, less damaging battles were taking place. But Lucas said he didn't want to hear about politics. He just wanted to take orders and fight. That was what a member of the Imperial Guard should do. Remembering when he reported about the senior who lost his head, and the captain called it a phantom phenomenon because of the residual traces. Luca then wondered if that was really the case, but said the captain's reaction to his words suggested otherwise. Pensive, he knew there were still many questions of his that remained unanswered. However, he wasn't stupid enough to go digging for information, since headquarters refused to respond. There was an extravagant place in the cadet training facilities that didn't match the atmosphere there. This place was the visiting room, created so soldiers could meet with family and friends. However, Luca had never thought he would visit the visiting room since he came from a poor orphanage. So he never imagined anyone would seek him out there, he thought, as he looked at a white-haired girl standing before him. The girl was Lilian Ramon's, sister of Claude, and the soldier wondered why she had come there to see him. Remembering the incident, he thought she must be there to question him about her brother's death, since Luca had been the team leader. The girl asked him not to worry, because her family had already expected it ever since Claude became a member of the Empire. Sipping her coffee, the girl said she was there to see him, and went on to say that Claude had spoken about him often, referring to him as a talented friend among the other cadets. So her brother had wanted them to meet. Luca asked the girl if she knew about his origins, and she replied that she preferred it that way, since formalities and bureaucracy in this case were minimal. The boy said she seemed to genuinely want to get to know him. Lilian asked if he didn't like the idea of getting to know each other better, and the boy asked her why specifically him. Then the girl asked if her brother's request wasn't reason enough, and said she believed it would be advantageous for him. Thoughtful, Luca agrees with that fact, since someone like him marrying a noblewoman like her would be a miracle. While thinking that he has done everything to be successful in life, if marrying a noble would bring him closer to his goal, he would do it. However, it all seemed far too easy, which was making the boy hesitant and suspicious. Responding to the girl, the soldier refuses the offer, leaving her surprised. As he stands and turns to leave, Luca bids farewell to the white-haired girl. Thinking that he always thought Ela was stupid for trying to escape the Empire, he never imagined he would make a decision based on a feeling. The boy is certain that Lilian, being a noble, would see that as an insult, and he hoped this wouldn't make things worse. Suddenly, the girl approaches Luca, holding his hand, catching him off guard. Blushing and holding his hand, Lilian says she must have rushed things, and asks that they start by becoming friends. Still surprised and looking at the girl, he replies that that wasn't what he meant. The girl, having already let go of Luca's hand, runs off in the opposite direction, saying she will be back soon to see him again. Staring at his hand, the boy grows pensive. He thinks it will be hard to get rid of Lilian. Some time later, in the Empire's physical training hall, Luca and a man with a ponytail face each other. The man was Kinuan, the Imperial Guard's combat instructor, who laughed, saying he didn't expect the cadet to come to him. Then the boy replies that he wants to learn from him, but Kinuan says there's nothing more he can teach because of the soldier's talent, saying he knows few cadets stronger than him, to which Luca answers that he's not satisfied with just being the best among the cadets. However, Kinuan tells the boy not to be so hasty. The instructor was different from the others, strong but using cheap devices. Even though Luca's were better, he didn't have the Legion. Clenching his fist, he's grateful for the opportunity, thinking that if he can't beat him, he stands no chance against a paladin. Sighing, the instructor says he left him no choice and tells the cadet to come at him. Quickly advancing toward Kinuan, the boy prepares to throw a punch. With little effort, the instructor redirects Luca's punch, asking if he wanted to test his new mechanical parts. Preparing another strike, the boy thinks that even though he's a retired guard, the instructor won't even feel this hit. Then he unleashes a flurry of blows on Kinuan without giving him any room to breathe. Moving in, Luca thinks about leaping toward his opponent to close the distance, and he will finish everything with a single strike, extending his arm toward the instructor. With his arm also extended, Kinuan watches the boy, still not taking any action. Grabbing the instructor's sleeve, Luca pulls his arm downward, taking it out of the way, while preparing another powerful blow, already claiming victory in his mind. Still with no expression on his face, the instructor simply watches the attack coming his way. When the blow is about to land, Kinuan uses his mechanical eye. Suddenly, Luca is seen upside down in the air above his opponent, as if he had been thrown. Not understanding a thing, the boy, shocked, wonders why he's in the air. Then, placing his hand on the ground to recover his stance, he thinks that won't stop him, and launches an upside-down kick toward the instructor's face. Still on guard, the instructor grabs Luca's foot and ankle as he attempts the kick. Then, in a split second, the boy finds himself being thrown again, sent flying far away, bouncing several times on the ground before finally stopping. Looking fearfully toward Kinuan, he wonders what the hell just happened. Approaching him, the instructor says that besides failing to gauge his opponent's strength, he also got distracted during the fight, Looking at the boy, he asks why he's in such a rush, still lying down and wondering what had just happened. Luca thinks that from his point of view, his first attack should have landed on the instructor's chin. However, as soon as the instructor touched his arm during the attack, his body was stunned. As if he had lost control, the kinetic energy of his strike was redirected back into him. Then he asks the instructor what that move was, and Kinuan replies that it's his personal defense technique. Quickly rising from the floor, Luca asks Kinuan if he could learn that technique. With a trembling hand, Kinuan looks at the boy and asks if he truly wants to learn it after ending up in this state. He also says that cutting corners always comes with a price to pay, while his ketchup drips onto the floor. Once again, we see the two in the arena, facing each other while sitting. Then Kinuan asked Luca what he had learned from that battle, to which he replied that he had been lured in and lost control of his body. The instructor said that this was the Archi's combat method, and the boy asked if that method wasn't used by bandits. He also said it should be implemented into military standards, but the teacher replied that the method had 3 problems. The boy asked if it was because it was difficult to learn. The instructor agreed and praised him, and he also mentioned a problem in the brain. Again, the instructor agreed, but said that the last problem he couldn't know just yet. Lucas said that in the future he would try to learn it. As he stood up, Kinuan said that it wasn't his decision to make, and asked if the boy knew how much money had been invested in him. The soldier also stood up, trying to answer, but was interrupted by the instructor, who then told him to respond, saying that training that technique inevitably caused brain damage, and asking if Luca could then swear never to use it. Looking at the professor's back, the boy knew that if he lied, he would know, so he said he couldn't swear it, but would try his best not to use the technique, making Kinuan smile. The instructor turned, smiling, and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, saying he liked his honesty, leaving the soldier surprised. Suddenly, the instructor swept Luca's legs, and before he could react, he was on the ground. Walking to the other corner of the ring, the teacher told him to always anticipate attacks from now on, because only then would he be ready for any situation. The boy, looking at him, asked if that meant. Then Kinuan stared back at him and told him to get up quickly, because he liked those who learned fast. After a while, Ela, concerned, asked Luca if he was managing to sleep well, while his friend looked at him with a tired face and huge dark circles under his eyes. The two walked down a corridor, as the protagonist replied to the blonde that he had just been busy, thinking that it had been a month since the start of training with Kinuan, who in reality didn't teach him anything directly. The instructor had told him to observe and learn on his own, because the Archi's combat was different, and used the maximum of the user's abilities. It was a superior form of combat, using every weapon in one's arsenal to create the most efficient method within seconds. It was a way of using the mind. Meanwhile, Luca asked how Lay's mission went, and he replied it had been nothing special. Still walking, the noble said the recent missions had been easy, and the protagonist said the Alliance must be being careful, asking the blonde if that wasn't the reason the commander wasn't around, to which he replied he had heard from his family about it. Then the boy asked if it would at least have to be a rebellion for the commander to be deployed, and his friend confirmed it. While Luca looked alarmed, Ela said he didn't know many details, but that a group had planned a rebellion. Irritated, the protagonist called the group stupid for trying a civil war in the middle of a war against the Alliance. Then his friend said that if you made the foolish mistake of ignoring such problems, you would end up rotting from the inside. Hearing that, Luca pinned him against the wall and prepared to punch the blonde in the face, telling him in a threatening tone that he would overlook his wish to leave the Empire, but not him becoming an enemy. Scared and breathless, the noble said he had also passed the guard's attitude test, but thought it was important for the Empire to know about it, asking the soldier to calm down. Releasing his friend, Luca told him not to say suspicious things, because he didn't want to see his name on the rebel list. Smiling, Ela asked his friend to relax, and as a gift offered to pay for his meal over the weekend. But without looking at the noble, the protagonist said he already had plans and told his friend not to talk to him because it was irritating. Standing in the hallway, the noble asked the cadet if the plans were with a girl, but Luca told him to just leave. After some time in the lower sector of Acretia, Luca and Kinuan said they felt nostalgic about being there again. The protagonist said that ever since becoming a soldier, he had never thought of returning to that slum, while the instructor looked at him excitedly. Passing by two men fighting, he hadn't imagined that the teacher would bring him to that place. All the thermal waste and heat were released into the lower sector, and Luca, when younger, had breathed that air all the time, feeling that if he didn't get out of that place, he would be a loser for the rest of his life. Called by Kinuan, the distracted boy shifts his attention back to the instructor, who was standing in an alley. After passing the alley, there was a somewhat busy place. Looking at the shop windows, Luca asks if this is a black market, saying that some curious kids never came back from here. While the instructor asks if it's his first time there, the boy realizes the teacher knows this place better than he does. Looking at his hand, He remembers that Kinuan told him to use low-quality arms and legs and wonders why. In front of him, the instructor tells Luca to get ready. At the end of the hallway are two guards standing in front of a door. When the boy and the teacher approach, one of the guards tells them to stop, and Kinuan replies that he wants to speak with the supervisor. Hearing that, the guard asks if he knows Aleph, the boss of the place, and Kinuan says no, he just wanted to see him. The guard then draws his pistol and points it at the long-haired man's head, asking if he's crazy. Kinuan smiles at the situation. Meanwhile, Luca quickly moves in and takes the guard down. Not understanding what just happened, still falling, the guard looks and realizes it was the boy. When they finally hit the ground, the other guard turns toward them. However, the soldier had already disarmed the guard on the ground and was pointing a gun at him, telling him not to move. With a smile on his face, Kinuan asks the nervous guard if he understands the situation now and tells him to bring Aleph quickly. The two guards then throw their weapons to the floor. Looking at the instructor, Luca asks what he would have done if Luca hadn't been fast enough. Kinuan replies that he would have found another way, while the boy looks around and asks what this place is. Smiling, the man answers, saying this is the hottest spot in the Empire, which leaves Luca confused. Seeing the boy's confusion, Kinuan, still smiling, tells him this is the coliseum. Inside, two guards are in front of a closed room. Inside the room, the boy and the teacher are sitting across from three other men. A fat man in a suit sits in front, while the others stand behind him like bodyguards. Facing the man, Kinuan points at the apprentice and asks the fat man to put the boy in the match. He adds that it's fine if the boy dies fighting, and Luca then understands why he needed low-grade equipment. While listening, the fat man takes a drag from his cigarette. Unexpectedly, he flicks the still-lit cigarette toward the teacher. Quickly, the boy catches the cigarette that would have hit the instructor's chest, while the teacher stands still without reacting. Meanwhile, they notice the two guards are pointing their guns at them. The fat man then says they misunderstood, that he only called them here because it would be easier to get rid of them. Analyzing the situation, Luca knew this was a bluff, since if he didn't want to hear them, he could have gotten rid of them long ago. And now three guns are pointed at them, not counting the two guards outside. Thinking about what he needs to do first, he kicks. He flips the table toward the fat man, using it as a shield, startling and surprising the pimp and his bodyguards. While destroying the table, he charges toward the enemies. Then he puts the fat man in a chokehold, disarming him. With the pimp's gun, he aims at his bodyguards, quickly landing a shot to the head of each one, taking them down. Hearing the shots, the guards outside storm into the room to see what happened, but Luca is already on them with his gun aimed, sending those two to a better place as well. However, this was all a simulation created by his mechanical eye, and Kinuan then asks about the former owner of the place. The fat man then asks if he knew Tora, saying he was caught reading matches, and after that, he was done for. The teacher says it was a good deal, since the fat man took down Tora and took over the coliseum, something normal, since Tora did the same thing. Getting closer to the instructor, Aleph points his gun at his head, asking how he knows so much. But this time, with a serious look, the man tells him to calm down unless he wants to visit Tora in the afterlife. Hearing that, the thug becomes startled and afraid. Then, telling his guards to lower their weapons, the fat man sits back down. Awkwardly adjusting his glasses, he asks if all Kinuan wants is for the boy to join the match. Analyzing Luca, Aleph says his body isn't built for combat, and that he'll be destroyed quickly. Then he agrees to put the boy in the match but wants something in return. So Kinuan offers Tora's safe, saying that he knew his location and that the fat man had the eye of Tora. The fat man, now worried, wondered who he was and why he knew so much. Smiling, the man said he was merely a spirit from the past and that Aleph didn't need to worry. The fat man offered the teacher VIP treatment, which he accepted, then requested that they put Luca against their best fighter. Looking at the instructor, the boy could see he still had much to learn from him, someone who could take control of a situation without moving a muscle. Already in the Coliseum's waiting room, Kinuan stared at a tablet and reminded the soldier that the fight was in 2 hours, and the boy asked him what was inside the vault. The instructor replied that the contents could change Aleph's life and said he would explain more to Luca after his victory in the fight. Showing the tablet to the boy, the teacher said his opponent was Gabriel, the Iron Fist. Kinuan said that Coliseum fighters didn't care about the future and would use anything to win, reminding him that he might not be able to take even one direct hit. Looking at Luca, the instructor told him to pay attention because he was going to explain the foundation of the Archi's combat method. Relaxing his hand, the teacher told him to be satisfied with what he had. Hearing that, the boy said he had learned that satisfaction meant losing, but Kinuan replied that water doesn't break, it changes shape. Then he said he had been watching him since his first exam, and with his potential, seeking him out had been the right thing to do. Luca said the instructor was just buttering him up, to which he placed a hand on his shoulder and agreed. Smiling, he said this could be the last time he would see him. The boy returned the smile. Lights illuminated the main arena. As the cadet walked toward the arena, the announcer introduced him as bold for challenging Gabriel in his very first fight, saying that the boy was still drinking from a baby bottle and calling him good boy. But Luca thought the nickname was awful. As he passed through the crowd, he heard many boos and people asking who had let him in there. Looking around, he saw several spectators excited to see the boy get destroyed. Ignoring all that, he kept walking toward the arena, thinking how humans have dark desires. Then stepping into the arena, Luca knew they truly wanted to see him destroyed, and that was actually a good thing, because he finally felt like he was back home. Pulling down his hood, he decided to show those losers what he was capable of. Remembering his childhood, the boy said he had never felt full when he was younger. Twice a month, an imperial officer would send supplies to the orphanage, but the owner always sold more than half of them. So for the children in the orphanage, hunger was normal. But even hungry, he never stopped training. He always read every book, even the old and dusty ones, and trained his body using weights made of stone. While doing that, the other children would ask if he was stupid, saying it would only make him hungrier. Staring at the other children, he said that if he was hungry, he could get more food by using his strength. The strong destroy the weak. He understood that rule well. It was normal for the strong to be full and the weak to be hungry. While the other children cried after getting beaten, they would say he was a poor child just like them and shouldn't do that. At the end of the day, he was just another member of the lower levels, still eating and ignoring what the children said. Luca thought he didn't need to listen to the crying of the weak. At 12, his name was placed on the list of potential Imperial Guard trainees, and at 15, he officially became one. Thinking that those children had no idea what the life he lived was like, he hoped never to see those losers again. For most of his time as a trainee, he had forgotten that place and thought he would never set foot there again. Standing in front of his opponent, Luca heard the crowd chanting Gabriel's name. With a smile, the opponent said that for them to put a kid as his enemy, Aleph must have used something really good. But being paid was what mattered. As the boy analyzed Gabriel, he noticed that his body was completely asymmetrical and unbalanced. His parts came from different factories, and the skin in contact with his armor suffered from constant inflammation. Still, he was powerful. His body had been modified solely for the purpose of becoming stronger, Luca thought as he stared at him. Standing close to the boy, Gabriel said he wasn't bad-looking, and asked why he didn't serve him that night. With a smile on his face, the cadet said the opponent really would need a servant, because he would be destroyed that night. Hearing that, Gabriel becomes extremely irritated. While heading to his side of the ring, the Iron Fist says he's going to beat Luca so badly that he'll beg to be his servant. With a microphone in his hand, the fat man starts the show, saying that the world of Destroy or Be Destroyed is about to begin. Meanwhile, Kinuan watches from the stand. With everyone's attention on the arena, Aleph announces that the massacre is about to start. With his fist clenched, Luca knows that judging by his opponent's modified body, he can't take even a single hit, or it will cost him his life, as Gabriel charges toward him, preparing to punch the boy. However, the soldier dodges the attack, making the opponent's fist smash straight into the ground. Once again, Iron Fist tries to land a punch and misses. Then, taking the opportunity, the boy lands a clean kick right to Gabriel's head. Laughing as he looks at Luca, he asks if that kick was supposed to tickle, and the excited boy thinks that if he had his real armor, the enemy would have exploded from that kick, while backing off to put some distance between them. Looking back, he realizes he can't keep running because the arena is too small. Gabriel attacks Luca several times, who dodges them all, knowing each strike is lethal, yet his own don't cause any damage. He also knows the audience isn't rooting for him, but against him, with everyone shouting for him to be destroyed quickly. Recognizing the disadvantage, the boy wonders what Kinuan wants him to learn here. Then he remembers the instructor's words, thinking that no matter how little he has, he must fight with it, without complaining. Looking at the enemy, he recalls that the teacher had taken his good armor, but not his eyes. That means the man expects him to win not only through brute force, Luca thinks as Gabriel attacks again. Arki's combat consists of using everything you have at your disposal to its maximum potential, the boy thinks as he activates his mechanical eye. Then, analyzing the situation, he sees that Gabriel's fists are like cannons triggered by a mechanism in his shoulder. However, they're slow compared to a real weapon, and their trajectory is obvious as he watches the strike coming his way. Realizing what has happened, Kinuan is surprised. A smile appears on his face as he says Luca is a genius. Remembering the boy's exam, the teacher says he has already experienced Arki's combat before through his own talent. He urges the boy to show his potential, while Luca dodges all his opponent's strikes, advancing toward him. Unable to land a hit, Gabriel becomes nervous. The furious crowd screams for Iron Fist to finish him off and not lose to a child. Luca, feeling his focus sharper than ever, realizes he can predict all of his opponent's attacks, and remembering what Kinuan had done to him, he wonders if he can do it now. Placing his hand on Gabriel's mechanical arm, Luca kicks his opponent's knee, causing him to lose his balance and sending him into the air. Then, while still airborne, the big guy takes a kick to the face, being launched far away. Excited and laughing, Luca feels energized, finally understanding what the teacher saw in him. In front of the boy, Gabriel gets up after taking the hit. With veins bulging and blood boiling with rage, he says he doesn't know what kind of magic the boy used, and charges toward Luca, saying his attacks won't work on him anymore, preparing to throw another punch. The punch is so strong it causes an explosion in the arena. With a psychotic grin on his face, the boy dodges the strike, which barely grazes his face before exploding against the wall. Taking advantage of the moment, he approaches Gabriel, asking if he thought his attacks wouldn't work on him, saying that if he didn't have strength, he only needed to fill that gap by using something else, while boosting himself upward, flipping upside down, and locking Gabriel in a chokehold. With no time to react and the hold locked tightly around his neck, the opponent keeps a tense expression on his face. But without wasting time, Luca twists his opponent's neck, snapping it and finally winning the fight. Then, with his opponent's body still falling, the unharmed boy lands in the arena. Seeing the shocked audience, he tells them they can keep waiting for his defeat forever, but he will keep climbing to the top. Meanwhile, Gabriel's body lies on the ground behind Luca. Pulling up his hood, the cadet thinks he was only able to focus like that because he was in a controlled environment. Still with the audience in stunned silence, Luca walks toward the exit of the arena. The bored boy said he had no choice but to admit that Kinuan was a good instructor. He was praised by the instructor, who had been waiting for him. Arms crossed, the man welcomed him to his initiation into Archi's combat, while Luca said he had learned a lot from the fight. Extending his hand to him, the teacher asked the boy to take what he was giving him. Holding it, he saw it was a credit chip and asked if he was being paid for the fight, but Kinuan replied no. It was for Gabriel's treatment, and that it was good to be generous, but only up to the point where it didn't make you a fool. Luca said he wanted to be a soldier, not a good Samaritan, but the teacher called him naive when it came to relationships. In a serious tone, the instructor said he wasn't talking about charity but investment. This would help him in the future, saying that earlier that day he had spent his investments on Torah, reminding him that creating a favorable environment is what makes a good soldier. Watching Kinuan walk away, Luca understood that the instructor was actually investing in him as well, and that in the future, he would collect on his investments in a way the soldier could not refuse. Meanwhile, someone was working on a tablet. Gabriel was in the hospital, hearing the doctor say that due to previous modifications to his body, he would have to use the new Zionic. Shouting, the big man said he couldn't afford that model and asked if the doctor wanted to rob him too. He said everyone else there seemed fine with cheap bodies, but the doctor countered that no one else had made such extreme modifications. Meanwhile, Luca was in the corner of the room listening to everything, and realized that without his help, Gabriel wouldn't get the necessary parts. Angry and asking if the doctors knew how much he had spent on those modifications, the Iron Fist didn't even notice Luca. At the doorway, the boy asked how he was, saying he was happy to see him as energetic as ever. When he saw Good Boy, Gabriel's eyes shone with rage. With the boy in front of him, he shouted that he would destroy him, and that he would do it no matter what. Getting closer to Gabriel with an intimidating expression, the protagonist said he had warned him he'd destroy him in that fight. But then he remembered Kinuan's advice, realizing he was going too far and should hold back. Walking over to the doctor, Luca asked about the Zionic model he had mentioned. He showed the credits on his chip, asking the doctor if that amount was enough, and the doctor confirmed it was. Not understanding what was going on, Gabriel asked what he was doing, to which he replied that he was paying for his medical expenses. Still confused, the big man asked why, and hearing Good Boy say he just felt like it, said that nickname fit him perfectly. Then, struggling with his own pride, Gabriel understood that this was the mercy of the victor. Asking Good Boy for his real name, he was told it was Luca. Then, looking at the boy, the Iron Fist said that if he ever needed his help, he just had to ask, saying he was in debt to the soldier, which Luca thought he actually liked the feeling of. Back in the physical training arena of Acritia, two people faced each other in a ring. Wasting no time, one of them rushed toward his opponent. It was Ela who threw a kick toward Luca's head. While blocking the kick with his hand, the soldier kept a bored expression. Then, relaxing his hand, he used Archi's combat to spin his friend and throw him away. After the training ended, it was clear the blonde's body had felt that session. Sitting next to Luca, Ela asked if he had learned Archi's combat from instructor Kinuan, and he confirmed it. A bit confused, the noble asked if that wasn't used by bandits, and the boy replied yes, even if it was hard to believe. Then, the noble soldier said he couldn't imagine beating Luca anymore, and Luca praised him for being the only trainee able to fight him. Knowing that going to the coliseum had been very good for him, the soldier smiled, and his friend noticed he was happier than usual. The blonde asked his friend if he could help him with something, and he agreed. Then, in the visiting room of the Empire of Cthia, the protagonist was irritated. Meanwhile, Ela, looking away, kept a nervous expression on his face. By his side was Lilian, her red eyes staring fixedly at Luca. Trembling, the soldier called his friend's name, who apologized, saying his family and the girls were close, and he couldn't refuse. Soon, the white-haired girl said she had signed up several times to visit him and asked why he had been avoiding her. So the cadet tells the girl it's because he's not interested and thought she would realize that if he ignored her. Hearing that, Ela asks his friend to be a little nicer, but Luca tells him to shut up because he's already irritated. Still looking at Luca, Lilian asks why he hates her, and he replies that he has no time for women, only for his goal. She asks if he wouldn't benefit from being closer to her, but he says she doesn't understand, explaining that if he took advantage of her power as a noble, he could lose everything in an instant, and he's not aiming for that. While the blonde looks down tensely, the girl says it's strange for him to say that, since he's so close to Ela, who is also a noble. But Luca replies to Lilian that the blonde is his friend and has nothing to do with his family. Finally, the girl asks if he really won't give her any chance. After finishing his drink, the boy gets up, saying that unfortunately no, and hopes she won't visit him again. As he leaves with a serious expression, the girl and Ela remain seated in silence. Outside the visiting room, the blonde calls out Luca's name. As he approaches, he says his friend didn't need to be so cruel like that. Then the protagonist replies that otherwise she wouldn't leave him alone, and the noble asks why he hates her so much. The soldier says it's because he can't understand why she likes him, and thinks she's planning something. But his friend says it makes no sense for him to be afraid without knowing why, and that they could try more slowly. However, he's interrupted by Luca, who asks if Ela likes the girl, leaving him speechless. Shocked, Ela asks where his friend got that idea, and Luca replies he noticed it from his breathing and panic. With a threatening look, he tells the blonde that he's not interested, and if Ela likes her, he should make his own move. Ela doesn't answer, still unsettled by Luca. Bothered, he turns his gaze to the table where they were sitting, thinking that unfortunately that's impossible for him. In a great magma pit in the city, two people are sitting atop a pillar near the edge of the pit. One of them is Luca, meditating, thinking he needs to stay calm no matter the situation. At his side is Kinuan, and the boy asks how he would have resolved the fight in Alepht's office. Recalling the situation, the boy couldn't imagine a way of getting out unharmed without a weapon, wondering what the instructor would do when Kinuan tells him he would have gotten under the table when the fight started. Confused, Luca says the thugs had guns. If he hid, he'd lose any chance to attack. The teacher says he would do that because he knew the boy would attack at the first opportunity, and Luca asks what he would do if alone. Then, the instructor says he knows what the apprentice was planning because he was trained to maximize his aggressiveness. However, if he had taken the fat man hostage, he would have been shot along with him. It's normal for gangs to replace their boss. But before that could happen, Kinuan would have destroyed them and escaped with Luca through a secret passage. Looking at the instructor, the boy realizes he not only predicted what he would do, but also had an escape route in mind, and that he couldn't grasp the teacher's mind. He says Arches uses the whole brain to heighten perception, so Luca, hearing this, understands that brain problems come from constantly pushing it to the limit. After thinking for a moment, he asks Kinuan if using the Legion wouldn't allow him to use Arches combat, and the instructor confirms. Upon becoming a guard, he would be gifted a Legion, which uses memory signals to access all brain resources. That means there wouldn't be any extra resources left for Arches while using the Legion. Disappointed, Luca knows the teacher hid this because of how he'd react, but if he'd known earlier, he wouldn't have learned it. Then seeing the boy leaving, Kinuan wonders if this is the end, and the boy thanks the instructor for everything. Still watching the boy, the instructor says that if he changes his mind, he's always welcome there. Still very tense, and without saying another word, Luca leaves. Inside a room of the Empire, the boy stands still, hearing from someone that 3 months have passed. It was Cthia saying he'd been busy, so he didn't have time to meet with the trainees. The commander asks the cadet how he's doing, guessing he was called because of the rebellions, and Lucas says he's been training alone. Saying that he hadn't been called for any recent missions, the chief told him he wasn't going, as he was already strong enough. Luca thanked the commander, who then asked if he had been training with Kinuan lately, making the boy wonder if that was why he had been summoned. He thought that the Empire's high command must have noticed it because of his visit to the slums, the black market, and his participation in the coliseum. Then, Cthia asked if he had been training Arches combat with Kinuan, and the boy replied that he wasn't anymore. The chief then said that since Arches couldn't be used with the Legion, it was meaningless for someone from the Empire, and that he understood Luca. Those without talent were discarded by Kinuan, and the talented found no reason to learn it. That's why he was the only Arches user. Looking at the commander, the soldier asked if he wanted him to continue learning Arches combat. The chief said he wanted him to maintain a good relationship with Kinuan, so he should continue, and told him this was an order. Surprised, Luca wondered why Cthia was being so cautious with a retired soldier, but knew better than to ask. The boy replied that he would follow orders, Then the commander told him to remember that he was always watching him closely, and finished by saying the boy was the type to reach the top. Back in the lower sector, Kinuan, looking at a toy helmet, said he hadn't expected such a quick return from the trainee. He also said he had told him to come back anytime and wouldn't ask any more questions, while Luca thanked him. Still looking at the instructor, he thought it would have been harder to convince him to teach him again. The protagonist asked the instructor why they were there today, to which he retorted by asking if the kids still liked those toys. Turning to the shop owner, Kinuan said he would buy all the toys there and asked him to deliver them. The shop owner asked if he had heard correctly, while Luca, equally surprised, wondered why he was buying them. But after arriving at the location, he understood why, asking the instructor if this was an orphanage. The instructor told the boy to set the boxes of toys down and rest for a bit. The soldier heard someone calling him. Behind him was Gabriel, irritated, carrying the boxes and asking if the boy thought he was a baggage handler. The protagonist remembered that the big man had offered him help back in the hospital, and it would be much easier since the shop didn't deliver. Then Gabriel retorted that he had offered help for something bigger, like a fight or something like that. Smiling, Luca replied that he didn't need his help in a fight. Still looking at the bald man, he noticed that the implant of a new spine had slightly improved his balance. As they looked toward the instructor near the door, Gabriel asked the boy who that man was, then said he should have heard of him if he was really that infamous, since even Aleph couldn't handle him. Luca told him that if he were him, he wouldn't stick his nose where it didn't belong, unless he wanted to lose his head. Looking at the place, he thought this was probably the orphanage where Kinuan had grown up, which was why he was doing charity there. Several children from the orphanage came running toward the two of them. While the children thanked them, the two handed out the gifts, and Gabriel said the kids were rude after one of them called him ugly. Then two children started fighting over one of the boxes to see who would get the gift. Seeing the scene, Luca remembered his childhood and that nothing was fair. You had to grow stronger to obtain things through power. While lost in thought, someone came up behind the protagonist and called his name. When he turned, he saw it was the instructor, calling him to talk alone. Leaning against a fence, Kinuan said that from time to time, he visited the lower sector and praised the director, saying he was doing a great job since they didn't receive much for taking care of the orphanage. Curious, Luca asked the instructor if he had grown up there, and he replied that he had already forgotten such things and had just stopped by chance, and that maybe he had even visited the orphanage where the boy had grown up. Staring at the teacher, the protagonist thought it made him seem like just a normal retired soldier. A retired soldier stripped of his glory, with a damaged nervous system from brain injury. The boy wondered if that would be him in the future if he lived that long. Then Kinuan asked them to get straight to the point, and in a threatening tone, he asked Luca who had told him to come back to seek him out. With his combat eyes activated, he turned toward the boy and asked if it had been Commander Castoria. The protagonist, in shock, stares at the instructor without moving. Then, turning his face forward and stopping his gaze at the teacher, the boy asks what the man meant by that. How could he know the orders from the chief? Could it be that he was hiding something dangerous? Was that why Castoria was concerned? As he starts preparing for an attack, he thinks that if that were the case, then he would probably have to eliminate him. However, looking straight at the boy, Kinuan tells him to calm down if he wants to stay alive. He also says that if Luca attacked him with full force, it would be hard to stop him without sending him to a better place. The boy, sweating nervously, says he's a soldier of the Empire, and that's the only thing he can say. Then the teacher says the protagonist knows so little he doesn't even know which path to follow. Placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, he says he won't judge him, since it's normal for a soldier to follow orders from his superiors. He also asks him if he thinks the first time he went to Kinuan was truly of his own will. When he manipulated the projectile's trajectory without a combat eye, the high-ranking officers had already begun preparations. Because finally there was someone who could learn Archies like him, the boy might think it was his own will, but it wasn't. Luca, in shock, doesn't want to believe all of this was calculated by the Empire, but rather that it was all his own choice. So he tells the instructor that it was his decision, and the man replies that everyone is a slave to someone, and they know whether they are or not. Staring at the boy, he says he probably wants to run from the truth now, because after all, he is still young. As he leaves, he tells the protagonist that he should return soon and feel free to report this to the commander. The reflective soldier thinks he doesn't believe Kinuan's words, but as he said, the chief wanted him to keep learning Archies. With his thoughts clashing, Luca tries not to dwell on the teacher's words and not to doubt the Empire. But what if even his desire to succeed wasn't truly his own? Sometime later, in the Empire's simulated training room, the protagonist in armor sits on a bench at the far end of the room. Looking down, he's frustrated that he couldn't report to the commander the day before. If he had, they would have put him through a psychological exam, and with the confusion in his mind, he would score lower than before. Besides, the Empire didn't forgive those with dangerous ideologies and could expel him from the Imperial Guard, sending him to a camp. Then, remembering the other day, he thinks Kinuan must have already known he would hesitate to report this to the chief. Soon after, a door opens, releasing smoke into the room. Then we see Ela coming out of the training room, looking completely exhausted. While panting, he suddenly catches a bottle thrown in his direction. It was Luca, who, seeing his friend training, says he seems different, and Ela replies that he's been working harder since losing to him. The blonde asks if he came just to cheer for a friend, saying he's happy, but the protagonist replies that obviously he has a request. The boy recalls that the noble once said some families buy the tests, and Ela replies that it's a very serious secret. Looking at Ela, the protagonist asks how he passed the psychological aptitude test. The noble, staring at him, asks if he knows that's a very dangerous thing to ask. Sitting down, Luca says he checked to make sure no one else was around, and his friend says he won't ask why. But there's a trick. It was to create a simplified version of your ego to interact with the world, hiding your real ego, and showing only what's favorable for the exam. Meanwhile, the confused protagonist questions him, and Ela replies that there are cases where people lose memories or change personalities due to trauma. So they were just doing that consciously, and Luca wonders if that's even possible. If he acted like a loyal soldier, this new ego would develop in his mind, and that's what Ela had done 2 months before the test. The only problem was that doing this for too long could make him forget his real ego, and the protagonist asks where he learned it. While thinking that by using this method he would just need to pretend to be his old self before meeting Ela and Kinuan. Looking at his friend, the noble says he doesn't know what Luca is trying to do, but asks him to be careful, because tampering with the psychological test is something very serious. Luca says he never thought he'd hear that from the blonde, as his combat eye suddenly activates, catching him by surprise. It was Kinuan who was trying to communicate with the boy. Then the two met again in the lower sectors, standing in front of a building. While staring at the building, the instructor told Luca that today would be a simple training exercise in action. He praised the building, saying it was well built for a gang hideout, and the boy thought the teacher was treating him normally, as if nothing had happened at the orphanage, and that was what made him feel bad. And the man told the protagonist he had 20 seconds. In front of a locked door, Kinuan told the boy to take down all the gangsters inside, and he replied that he understood. The protagonist then placed his hand on the door lock, blasting the lock open and making a loud noise. Inside the room, some gangsters were all relaxing with nothing to do. Hearing the sound of the door, one of the thugs stood up. Meanwhile, Luca was already inside the room heading toward the man, who stared back at the boy. Standing face to face, the thug asked what the boy wanted and said he didn't look like a customer. Calmly, the boy thought that one of the idiots was coming straight at him with a weapon. Analyzing the environment, he realized there were 3 armed thugs, one who seemed to be their leader, and someone in the bathroom. Then, pointing the gun at the protagonist's head, the thug said he was unlucky for having to do this to a kid. But before he could finish speaking, he took a punch to the stomach and ended up on the ceiling, without even seeing what had happened. The other 3 thieves looked at their friend stuck to the ceiling, unable to believe what had just happened. Meanwhile, Luca, with his fists clenched, said his mind had been too troubled lately, and he was going to take it out a little. The unconscious thug on the ceiling dropped the gun from his hand. With the other mobsters still staring at their friend on the ceiling, the gun fell toward the floor. Then they stood up, ready to shoot the boy. However, the protagonist stretched his arm to grab the falling gun. With the weapon already in his hand, Luca quickly aimed at the thugs, firing and hitting each one in the arms holding their weapons, disarming them. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, the gang leader aimed his weapon at the boy, firing several times in his direction while cursing the protagonist. Without much trouble, the protagonist dodged all the shots and said it was unbelievable that someone that bad could be a gang leader. Then Luca aimed his weapon toward the bathroom door. The door opened and another thug, pants down and holding a shock device, stepped out, wondering what was going on. Seeing the whole situation in front of him, he wondered what all the commotion was about. Still aiming at the thug, the boy told him to knock himself out if he didn't want to lose a few limbs. Looking at his shock device, the mobster thought for a moment about what he should do. After that, a bright light and electric sparks filled the entire room. Luca stood in front of the fallen thug on the ground, saying he still felt someone's presence in the bathroom. When he entered the room, he saw the body of a woman, naked and sitting on the floor. Then the protagonist's expression changed and filled with rage. While cursing the thugs, he also noticed that the girl was tied up with ropes. Already outside the room, Kinuan told the boy it had taken about 12 seconds to take care of them all, clapping and congratulating Luca, while he carried the girl out, using his shirt to cover her body. Still angry, the protagonist asked if they couldn't just finish those guys off, but the instructor replied no. Since they were outsiders, it would cause too much noise, and he told the boy he knew there were people in the world too weak to defend themselves. That woman had suffered that fate because she didn't have the strength to defend herself, and Luca had become powerful so he wouldn't end up like that. Normally, he would call people like her idiots, but at that moment, he couldn't feel anything except disgust. After that day, Kinuan kept taking the boy to the lower sectors and throwing him into fights without any prior information. He wasn't doing this to teach him to win, but to adapt to different situations by analyzing his surroundings, and even after several such fights, the instructor kept sending him into them without saying anything. Then, inside a repair shop in the lower sector, a red-haired girl wearing glasses and a blue jumpsuit greeted someone. Kinuan called her Gilda and asked for a cup of black coffee with a layer of oil on top, while Luca asked for the same but without the oil. The boy then asks if they really needed to stop there, and the instructor asks him if he doesn't feel proud to visit the woman he saved. He had saved that girl from a gang. Apparently, she had been kidnapped and went through horrible things. However, her mind remained intact, and she managed to return to a normal life. The reason for the kidnapping was because of a friend. The man explains that she was from an orphanage and had talent for engineering when she was a child, so he paid for her studies, but in an anonymous way, so she didn't know about it, and Luca asks him if he had known her from the very beginning. Someone expresses surprise while entering the place, and the two-seated look at the person. It was Gabriel, who, upon seeing the boy, asks him what he was doing there. Meanwhile, he orders a beer from Gilda, who recommends he stop drinking since his system was already fatigued from work. After saving Gilda, the professor introduced her to Gabriel, who became her bodyguard, and she his mechanic. The protagonist, looking at the big guy, says he should listen to his mechanic, and the bodyguard gets mad because it was just one beer. Then the bald man asks what he was thinking messing with all those thugs. The leaders were already making a plan against him, and not even he would be able to protect Gilda, but Kinuan says not to worry, as they wouldn't come back there for a while. The girl concerned asks how long exactly, and the instructor replies it could be a few months or years. Luca thinks he wouldn't be able to go to the lower sectors alone, as his superiors wouldn't allow it. Looking at the girl and the bald man, he thought that might be the last time he would see them. Even after the tragic episode, Gilda went back to her life and working again, and Gabriel kept facing more and more risks at work. However, the boy tells himself not to pity them. Maybe not being able to come back there again would be better for his current situation, he thinks while drinking his coffee. Back in the Empire, Cthoria's office is behind closed doors. Inside, we see Luca, who has just reported on his mission, and the chief says that Kinuan keeps doing strange things. He also says that he became a trainee late and normally wouldn't have that opportunity, but at that time the Empire needed it. Even the commander didn't know what kind of man Kinuan was. When Cthia was a recruit, Kinuan was already a key member of the Imperial Guard, so he assumed the instructor was a discreet specialist in secret operations, and the boy was surprised. Moreover, it seemed that the instructor really liked Luca, because out of all the trainees he had taken, the boy was the only one still lasting. He says the boy is excellent, but is vulnerable to negative influences, so he would schedule a psychological evaluation for him. Nodding, the protagonist already imagined that would happen. With a hand on his face, Cthia says he'll be frank, and that there are two paths for trainees with this kind of mission. Either they are eliminated to keep the secret, or they ascend to the heart of the Imperial Guard as a reward for their contribution, and he hoped Luca would ascend, while the boy replied that he was only following orders. If that operation ended well, he trusted that the commander would help him, said Luca, while Cthia had a smile on his face. The chief then replies, saying that if the boy's results were good, he would adopt him as his son. Luca Cthia, sounds good, says the chief while laughing, and the boy keeps a surprised expression, wondering if that was real. Was it really true that the chief Centurion wanted him as his son, Luca wonders. Meanwhile, still thinking about that, the boy is lying down to take the psychological test. Then, the robot conducting the test tells the protagonist they will begin the exam. It also says it detected happiness in the boy's expression, asking if something good happened. Laughing, Luca tells the robot it's none of its business and orders it to start the test already. Someone punches a punching bag. It was Ilya, who lands a series of blows, tossing the bag from side to side, and finishes the sequence with a powerful kick. After all that, his sweat drips onto the floor. Then the boy gets ready to deliver one final strike using his fist, landing a very strong punch that sends the punching bag flying away. With heavy breathing, the blonde boy finally finished his training. From a small container, he takes a green liquid that looks more like oil into his hand. With an uncomfortable expression, he rubs the liquid onto his elbow joints. Sitting next to him, Lucas says his friend had trained until his joints were worn out, and wonders if this was really the Ela he knew. With a smile on his face, the noble asks him if he passed the psychological exam, and he confirms, saying that if anything happens, he is there to help him. Seriously, the blonde says he couldn't tell him at that moment, but soon he would ask him for a favor and asks Luca if that's okay. Hearing that, the protagonist observed his friend, and he answers that if the blonde is in danger during combat, he will save him even if it means risking his own life to do so. Then, Ela thanks him and says that soon he will tell him what is going on, but he hopes it doesn't turn out the way he's imagining. Luca would be lying if he said he wasn't curious, but he decided not to interfere and to let things happen in their own time. Now that he had done well on the psychological exam and gained the chief's trust, his goal was to become a member of the Custoria family. At that moment, it was the only thing on his mind. Meanwhile, the commander said they were a new special military order. The purpose of the order was to suppress the rebels, and it consisted of 3 families led by the Ramones family. Upon hearing that name, the protagonist becomes startled and looks at his friend Ela. Remembering Lilian, he thinks he has understood what favor the blonde wanted to ask him. Then several soldiers board an army train. After boarding, the train shoots off at high speed. Luca then introduces himself as the leader of the 21st Army Suppression Battalion, while his subordinates quickly salute him. To think they would use army trainees as platoon leaders, the high-ranking officers clearly intended to use all of this as training anyway. The platoon is divided into 2, totaling 27 people, with Sergeant Kodrak as his orders assistant. It was composed largely of veterans who knew they were being used as tools for the trainees' training, so it was harder for them to follow his orders, but even so, he would have to be able to take control of them. He thought he had 2 options. The first was to leave everything to Kodrak, and the second. The assistant turns, startled, as Luca says in a threatening tone that he is superior to all of them, so they must follow his orders, and any disobedience would be punished. The protagonist had chosen to use force to shatter his allies' doubt and distrust, as they all stared at him. However, the sergeant places his hand on his shoulder, calling him and asking if they could talk for a moment. But Luca quickly grabs the assistant's arm, surprising him, and then throws him away toward the other soldiers, asking him how he dared touch his superior without permission, and if he wasn't taking this seriously because of his age. While walking, he says that he was also from the lower sectors and from an orphanage, but asks if they know what the big difference between them is. And upon reaching the sergeant, looking down at him, he says it's different because he is immensely superior to all of them. They might not understand at that moment, but they soon would, that he was the best platoon leader they would ever see. Kneeling, the sergeant listens to all of this without saying a word. Then, standing up, Kodrak responds, saying he understands his mistake and will be more careful, and Luca turns away. The boy realizes that the sergeant understood his attitude and that he had not chosen the easy way out. Meanwhile, at the rebel stronghold against the Empire, a large triangular-shaped ship was approaching. Inside the ship, in formation, were the rebels' suppression platoons. With his hand on his face and in disbelief, Ela sighs upon learning that his friend used force against one of his own platoon members. Then Luca responds, saying that if he were nice, they wouldn't respect him, because in their eyes, they were just kids. After that, the lighting in the room changes and they are surprised. A man on stage in front of all the soldiers says to skip the formalities. It was the commander, explaining that the rebels were in a post of arcane civilization and controlled all operations there. The place was protected by 2 walls, with a high-density force barrier like a dome, and arcane anti-aircraft towers. And there were 5 of those towers. The 11th Brigade was tasked with destroying them, while the rest would attack from the sides. The 11th Brigade wore full-body armor for all its members. The Empire was using considerable force there. The commander then says that the operation would start in an hour and a half, and they should finish preparations by then. After that, Ela and Luca are outside the vehicles. The protagonist, even expecting this, wonders how this was different from a picnic, since they would only act as support. Meanwhile, his friend answers him by saying that the Empire didn't want them to be destroyed. So after thinking for a moment, the blonde looks at his friend, and just as he's about to start speaking, Luca asks him if he's trying to talk about the Ramones family. And even if they were close, there was nothing they could do. If he got involved with the rebels, not even his own family would be able to save him. The noble replies, saying he's not expecting a miracle, but if there's any chance, he hopes to at least save Lilian. An angry Luca asks if he loves her so much that it's worth his life, and the friend answers that she had been his first love. Telling the blonde to man up, he says he's turned a blind eye until now, but this crosses the line, and that he'll be killed if he tries to save the girl. As he turns his back and walks away, he tells Ela not to do anything stupid and to take that as a warning. With a serious face, the noble answers, saying he understands. Then he turns the opposite way from Luca and walks off. Because of the Archie's strength, the protagonist knew that was a lie. His friend was planning to save Lilian at any cost. It didn't matter if he accepted it or not. The girl needed to be destroyed for her own good. He hoped it would happen amid the chaos and that she wouldn't meet Ela while still alive. That was his last desperate wish. As he looked at his helmet, Luca thought that the important thing was the head and chest. If those 2 areas remain intact, Imperial soldiers don't die. Then Kodrak approaches and calls for the squad leader, who responds by asking what he wants. The sergeant says he knows the protagonist's capabilities and that he had checked with the higher-ups, and the boy asks, "So what?" Continuing, the veteran requests that when they enter combat, Luca should also listen to his words, since he has served the Empire for 10 years. The protagonist tells him not to worry, as he will listen to anyone who makes a valid suggestion. Kodrak then thanks him. The ship then touches the ground. They were around the rebels' base. Then the ship doors open, and we see the armored brigade leaving the vehicle. That brigade was the Myrmidon model, and they wore full-body mechanical armor. This was the group in charge of neutralizing the towers, and after that, the other brigades would come into play. An order to open fire is given, and the entire armored brigade activates their thrusters. They all advance in the same direction so fast that they leave a trail in the sky behind them. They were moving in formation toward the rebel base's anti-aircraft towers. Meanwhile, the towers began charging a large amount of energy to attack. Then, opening a compartment in his chest plate, one of the soldiers unleashes a rain of missiles aimed at the tower. At the same time, the tower fires an energy beam toward the brigade soldiers, who dodge it. After the tower's first attack, the soldiers launch another explosive strike at the barrier, sending missiles at the base again, causing a massive explosion on the barriers, which still remain standing. In the middle of the cloud of dust raised by the explosion, two red eyes appear. It was one of the soldiers still heading toward the tower. As he approached, the tower fired another shot, which again failed to hit the soldier. Then, now very close to the tower, the soldier prepares to strike with full force, and using his spear, he delivers a blow toward the barrier. With the spear's impact, the barrier begins to crack. Meanwhile, the other soldiers keep firing missiles at the barrier to weaken it. Finally, the barrier shatters under the armored brigade's power. Watching everything from inside the ship, Luca was surprised at how quickly they managed to bring the barrier down. Now they had to neutralize the towers, according to the plan, in 1 minute after entry. If they failed, they would be at a disadvantage. If the armored brigade didn't take care of the towers, the suppression forces would have to bear the brunt and do it themselves. Then, an order is transmitted saying the towers have been neutralized and to proceed to the next stage of the operation. The battlefield was cruel and dangerous, but also where men found joy and adrenaline, and Luca loved it. Without that joy and adrenaline, he would have gone insane a long time ago. As he heads toward the exit, he orders his battalion to follow him and thinks that now was the perfect time to test his skills. The plan was for the infantry to enter from all directions at once, leaving no room for rebels to escape. The fort's underground tunnels were a labyrinth. They had a map from old expeditions, but the rebels had modified the tunnels. Amid the war and explosions, the soldiers advanced toward the fort. Then, one of them says they had probably limited the entrances to the underground to prevent the Myrmidons from getting in. Arriving at the entrance, the soldiers in formation remain cautious about the situation. Luca says he will take the lead from there, and Kodrak says it's risky in a place like that, which probably has several traps. Right away, the boy asks if the sergeant is afraid of dealing with the consequences of his death, to which he replies yes. But before he can continue speaking, the protagonist closes his helmet and says he doesn't care what happens if he goes down. Advancing quickly, he repeats that he will lead the way and orders them to follow him. He had felt a chill down his spine, as if the men behind him were ready to take him out, but he didn't have time for that now. Thinking about the girl, he remembers he needed to eliminate Lilian before Isekai arrived to rescue her. His friend was probably also in the tunnels now, at a different point, and would advance quickly with his troops. He could do the same by sacrificing his men, but he couldn't let his emotions take over and lose loyal soldiers. He would take all the risks upon himself, he thought, just as a trap was being activated above his head. Then, seeing that, Kodrak shouts the protagonist's name. In the blink of an eye, he draws his sword and cuts the trap's pipe that had been triggered by him. Using the Archi's method, he had heightened all his senses to the maximum. Even taste, and being able to sense chemical traces allowed him access to various information. Meanwhile, the soldiers stared at the protagonist, all of them shocked. Luca felt his arteries expand, his heart beating faster, and the pressure in his brain pushing him to his limit. Still advancing at high speed, he was frustrated that his men were so slow, and he felt like punching Kodrak. He knew in theory, but now he could feel in practice that prolonged use of Archis caused gradual brain damage. The boy was reaching the door, and on the other side, several rebel soldiers waited nervously for any movement, when suddenly, the protagonist kicks the door hard, sending it flying along with one of the enemy soldiers. Then the other soldiers prepare for combat, aiming their weapons at the boy. He grabs his sword as the enemies fire in his direction. Still in the same spot, Luca uses his sword to block every bullet fired at him, and as soon as the bullets stop, he rushes toward the enemies to take them down, taking out two of them instantly, sending ketchup flying everywhere. He then runs the blade across the neck of the third enemy, sending him off to a better place as well. The remaining soldier had a bazooka on his shoulder and, in shock, fired it at the protagonist, who slices the projectile in half with his sword effortlessly, causing the bazooka to explode before even reaching him. With all the smoke rising from the explosion, the rebel soldier couldn't see what had happened to Luca. While the rebel prayed that it was over, suddenly the protagonist emerges from the smoke heading straight for him. The rebel is startled, but it's already too late. There's nothing he can do. The Imperial platoon arrives just in time, seeing all that ketchup flying and the entire chaotic scene. Looking at all that, Kodrak has a terrified expression. Then Luca asks what the sergeant is waiting for, and with his sword dripping ketchup, he says they're moving forward and tells him to make sure to keep up. Several rebel soldiers unleash heavy gunfire. The shots are all aimed at where the Imperial soldiers are hiding behind a wall. Analyzing the situation, the protagonist hadn't expected there to be such a spacious area inside, and the defensive lines were probably there. While checking his map, he realized he had already advanced far, and would soon find the nobles evacuating. He then releases a flying camera to analyze the enemy formation. From the footage, he can see there are around 100 troops, and some people who weren't soldiers. Lilian could be one of them. The sergeant tells Luca that their platoon is far ahead compared to the others, and suggests they wait for another squad. It was a logical suggestion, especially since the protagonist's brain was overloaded from excessive Archi's combat use. Again, gunfire erupts, but this time it wasn't aimed at them. It was toward another direction. Realizing this, the leader sees that another group had arrived almost at the same time as they did, so he orders his soldiers to advance, since the rebels were distracted. The rebels fire toward the group again, which already had a defensive formation with shields in front. But with the power and speed of those shots, the shields wouldn't last more than a few seconds, and Luca says not yet. He knew that some of the rebels' weapons could take him out, so he had to be careful. The enemies had about 8 high-powered weapons, so he needed a moment when at least half of those weapons were being reloaded. Then, realizing the moment had come, he jumps over his subordinates, telling them to spread out and take cover. Aiming at the protagonist, the rebels start firing in his direction, and seeing their leader without shields, Kodrak is startled. However, light fire like pistols and rifles couldn't penetrate Luca's armor. Once on the ground, he draws his weapon to take out the enemy's weapons that were a real threat, and he fires, blowing up the rebels' high-powered weapons. Repositioning himself, the protagonist moves into the middle of the enemies, so they wouldn't be able to shoot him freely. Then, with his sword, he cuts through 2 rebels' legs as if they were leaves. Causing a huge explosion, Luca knew that in that situation he would be unstoppable. One rebel then surrenders, afraid of kicking the bucket. The leader orders Kodrak to capture all the rebels who surrendered, and he obeys the order. Looking over the battlefield, he sees several Imperial soldiers' bodies on the ground. Identifying them, he realizes they were from Ela's platoon, and that his friend was advancing while sacrificing his own men. He was so desperate that he was sacrificing his own men, Luca thought, angry and in disbelief. The protagonist wanted to save Ela, but he was still an Imperial soldier, and he had to choose one of the two and give up on the other. If he found Lilian, he should get rid of her right there. He didn't care if Ela hated him, as long as he could save his life. So he tells Kodrak to leave from here on and regroup with some other platoon. The surgeon calls Luca and says his combat skills were shocking and that he was an excellent soldier, but not a good commander. The boy replies that if he hadn't been the commander, they would have taken more losses, and asks what the problem was then. The answer was that he had left his men more than once and gone off alone. That didn't make him a good commander. Annoyed by that, the protagonist replies that he did it because they were inferior and wouldn't be able to understand his commands, and that he would be annoyed hearing them whine that they weren't used, so the sergeant replies that he won't be the strongest forever. Then Luca says Kodrak can mock him when that day comes, and the sergeant says he'll remember that. But walking away, the boy says he'll keep his warning in mind, and that if his methods were wrong, he'd think about his words. The subordinate then wishes the protagonist the best and thinks he didn't know a mind that open could exist alongside an ego that big. As he advanced, the leader noticed scorched walls and noble bodies on the ground. Probably the same was happening in the other corridors, since the suppression force had already entered the tunnels. Luca had to admit, Ela wasn't just someone he trusted in battle, he was his friend. But his friend was burning through Imperial troops for personal reasons. They didn't need to be sacrificed. A good platoon would never risk their soldiers' lives just to chase rebels. Even if he managed to find Lilian, there was no way to get her out of there. Her fate would be the same. The protagonist understood that his friend loved her, but he didn't need to go down with her. It was just an outburst of emotion. Then, hearing a noise, Luca spots a head, which says it's surrendering and that it was from the Ramones family. The soldier says he doesn't care whether he surrenders or not, only a king knows where Lilian Reconnaissance is. Looking down, a hostage says he doesn't know where the heiress is. However, noticing that his gaze shifted when he answered, the protagonist knew he was lying. He grabs the man's eye, making him scream and ask what he was doing. Luca then asks which way Lilian had run and says this was the hostage's last chance. Then he answers that she went down and that he didn't know if there was a shortcut because he wasn't a direct member of the family. The boy asks the hostage if he'd seen Ela, and he says yes, and that it was him who left him as just ahead. He said he was crazy and that they knew each other, but even surrendering and before he could finish speaking, the protagonist executes him, sending a fountain of ketchup into the air. Walking away, he says that he'd be executed anyway, so it was better it be painless. Normally he didn't feel anything when executing people, but today of all days he was a bit shaken. The screams and pistol shots were getting closer. If Ela had decided not to return, then what should he do? Luca wondered. Meanwhile, a soldier was standing in the middle of a room, surrounded by bodies on the floor. Despite everything, Luca remembers how his friendship with Ela always made him paranoid about the future. Now, however, the question of what he would do if his friend betrayed the Empire needed an answer. So determined to face the situation, he stepped through a door amid fallen bodies. Right after, he walked down a corridor filled with slain soldiers. Upon seeing the destroyed hall, the warrior immediately called out Ela's name. With his back turned, the blond man slightly turned his head to confirm that his friend had finally arrived. At this point, Luca accused him of having led his own men to their deaths for personal desires. Right in front of him, the young blond man stood protecting a small group. With that, the intruder recognized Vigo Ramones and his descendants, noticing that Lilian was among them. He then confronted him, claiming that all that destruction had happened because of her. With his hand on his weapon, Ela acknowledged that his companion would not be able to ignore that incident. Then he challenged him directly, telling him to draw his weapon. Drawing his own sword, the other replied that he would knock some sense into his head. At that moment, he prepared for battle, aware that despite theory, a real fight had many variables. Seeing the Ramones family retreating, he understood that the blonde was only buying time for their escape. For that reason, he decided he needed to eliminate the family first, even if the other hated him for the rest of his life. That way, he concluded he would not have to bear his friend's blood on his hands. However, the blonde realized his intention and asked if the target was now Lilian. Immediately, he advanced but was intercepted by a shot from his former ally. The young blonde kept firing to block his path. Ela explained that firearms were useless and trajectory prediction allowed them to be used to slow the enemy down. However, the intruder revealed that he had forced the amplification of his cybernetic signals before the mission to increase his speed. That meant it was impossible for the other to slow him with that shot. The Remonis family guards reacted and aimed their weapons at him. Without difficulty, he deflected the first projectile with his gauntlet. Right after, the shot bounced back toward one of the guards, startling him. Without hesitation, the attacker spun and struck the second family guard with his sword. With that, Vigo Ramones screamed desperately for him to stop. Ignoring the plea, his blade pierced Vigo's head without pause. With the guards out of the way, he advanced directly against the father and mother, killing them. After eliminating his targets, he turned and declared that now only Lilian was left. While the blonde struggled to stop him, the assassin claimed he had more than enough time to kill her. Facing Lilian Ramones, he said he would not forget her until she was dead. With his sword raised, he prepared for the strike and said he would give her a painless death, as it was the best he could offer. The young woman stared back at him and began to laugh, even with tears streaming down her face. While the young woman laughed, the blonde shouted Luca's name desperately to stop him. With a quick movement, he lunged at the warrior and pushed him away from her. With that, the two fell together while Lilian watched the scene from afar. Soon, the girl caught her breath and turned toward the confrontation. Quickly, the attacker pinned the other to the ground, pressing the blade of his sword against his neck. Even pinned down, Ela asked if he hadn't seen her face, amused by watching her own family die. Not understanding, Luca heard the explanation that she was finally free, as she had only been used as a marriage tool. Irritated by the answer, he asked him what he was talking about. Then, the warrior stood up, leaving his friend lying on the ground. He then ordered the other to stop defending her, because in the end, she was nothing but a traitor. With the young woman's help, Ela stood up and revealed that the families had been labeled traitors only as an excuse to kill them. He continued, arguing that if they were truly traitors, their defense would not have been so weak. Hearing the arguments, Luca realized his friend's reasoning wasn't wrong. The fortress invasion had been difficult, but afterward, everything seemed far too easy, as the family's forces were very small. Even with the logic presented, the warrior stared at the blonde and questioned what importance that held. He realized that, at this rate, his companion would end up dying along with Lilian. Even as the other tried to stop her, the girl revealed that her father was not innocent, as he had hidden an arcane relic. Turning to the attacker, the young woman reveals that the relic was the real reason for the Empire's attack. With that, she reveals the artifact and explains that it was thanks to it they were able to operate the fortress. Not understanding, he questions the reason for the revelation, but the girl claims to know he doesn't truly want to kill her. Next, Lilian states that he simply doesn't want Ela to hate him, which leaves the warrior without a reaction. The girl points out that his real concern is that the blonde might end up dying at the hands of the Empire. Soon, she proposes an option that could benefit all three, revealing that the relic can activate the teleportation device in the underground fortress. Keeping her eyes fixed on him, the young woman asks for help so they can escape the Empire's control. In the end, Lilian extends the relic toward Luca, leaving him to make the decision. Upon hearing about a teleportation device, Luca questions its existence, but the young woman confirms it was a secret escape route in the tunnels. With that, she says he can kill her if he doesn't trust her, but asks for help to activate the teleport, as she also doesn't want Ela to die. She then suggests they escape so the warrior can lie in his report, but he doubts the Empire would leave such a device behind. Lilian then assures him that only the direct line of the Reconnaissance family knew about the device, stating they will be safe underground. While pondering the difficult choice, Luca is aware that he doesn't care about the girl's fate. His greatest concern is for Ela's safety, as his friend's ideas could get him killed, and it would be easy to forge his disappearance on the battlefield. After reflecting, the warrior lifts his head, the decision finally made. Soon he interrupts his companion and demands he promise him one thing before they continue. He then imposes the condition: if the teleport fails, the other must not get in his way, reminding him that not even Lilian wants his death. The warrior stares closely at his friend, waiting for his promise. With that, the blonde finally raises his head and promises to keep the deal. Thus, he stands and leads the way down the stairs, while the other follows right behind them. While Ela and Lilian move ahead, Luca positions himself at the entrance to ensure their passage. The warrior then acknowledges that he has lost, for not only has he failed to stop Ela, he is now helping the fugitive. As they advance, the blonde calls for him to wait, making him turn toward him. Lilian then approaches and starts wiping the blood from Ela's face before it dries. With that, Luca urges them on, saying they are lucky to still be alive and should just get married already. Holding hands, the young woman apologizes to Ela, saying she never imagined things would reach this point. He reassures her, explaining that she is the one who taught him about the world and changed his way of seeing things. Ela continues, stating that if it weren't for her, he would have already gone mad, for he finally realized he's not strange, just different. Observing the scene, the warrior concludes that it was Lilian who put those ideas into Ela's head. He understands that such thinking could spread and bring down the Empire, opening the way for an enemy invasion. Determined not to allow the nation's ruin, he decides he must eliminate any danger with his own hands, even if that danger is Ela. With that, the warrior reaffirms to himself that he is not a traitor. Upon reaching the tunnel, he finally breathes in relief, while the girl confirms that it is a secret route. Soon after, Lilian reveals that her father was manipulated by the Emperor after discovering how to activate the fortress. Luca then asks how much longer they'll be going down, and the young woman points out they are close, just past the corridor. When Lilian thanks him, he replies that he is only paying a debt to Ela, and that next time, she will be dead. Next, the warrior bids farewell to his friend, telling him to stay safe, which leaves him in silence. Lilian then begins talking about a plan for when they manage to get out of there. Thus, she proposes they head to Border City and meet there after they separate. With that, the girl invites Luca to leave the Empire with them, but the answer is a direct refusal. The warrior leans against the wall, admitting he is tired of the whole situation. He then reflects on the mistake of helping his companion, but knows he must now think about how to report the incident. His hope is that the Belt Chief will take an interest in him to watch Kinuan, since neither of them is special. With that reasoning, he concludes that his superior will not ask too many questions. The group finally arrives before a large closed door at the end of the corridor. Turning to his friend, Luca warns him to be ready in case the device isn't there. Ela understands that if the teleportation device isn't there, it will be the end for them. As soon as the panel is activated, a strange sensation runs through the warrior's body. Immediately, his gaze sharpens as he tries to identify the source of that feeling. With the door opening, he concludes that the answer to what he feels is right ahead. He then closes his eyes and blocks his senses to focus entirely on what he's feeling. With that, he manages to detect a strong scent of fresh blood, oil, and iron coming from inside the room. Realizing there's no human presence, his eyes widen at what lies ahead. 4 Imperial guards in full armor stand in the room, waiting for them. Faced with the scene, Luca understands their situation has reached a dead end. He knows he would already be at risk against a single guard, but now he must face 4 of them. The worst possibility now is Lilian being captured alive, as she wouldn't withstand torture and would reveal everything. With that, the warrior realizes that his dream of helping Ela have the life he always wanted was nothing but an illusion. He understands the only way out is to kill the girl now to avoid suspicion, but attacking the Imperial guards would be a fatal mistake. Luca notices the soldiers are watching them, knowing that hesitation would only raise more suspicion. With that, Ela understands it's now or never to act. In a sudden movement, a single shot strikes Lilian in the head, and she falls backward. With his hand still holding the gun, he watches her lifeless body hit the ground. One of them then questions the 2 about why they only fired at that moment. Ela lowers his weapon and replies that he merely executed a hostage who was no longer useful. With that, the guard leader demands a full report and asks why they brought the rebel there. The soldiers then turn and begin escorting him away from the room. Luca remains still, watching his friend being taken away by the Imperial troops. In front of his captain, Luca is congratulated for his work as leader of the 21st Battalion. Next, Hemilas details the report, praising his leadership but suggesting he work with Kinuan to improve team trust. The conversation then shifts to Lilian Ramones, with the captain wanting to know why she chose him to guide her. Soon he explains that the plan, together with Ela, was to use Lilian as a hostage to steal the rebels' teleportation device. Even if it sounded logical, Hemilas questions him about the strong bond the other also had with the girl. With his hands behind his back, the young man states that neither of them would be foolish enough to ruin the mission for personal reasons. Right after, he confesses that the intention was to give Lilian a chance to survive if she helped them. With a sigh, the captain ends the conversation, dismissing the young man so he can rest. As he turns to leave, Luca is called again by his superior. Then, Hemilas reveals that the Reconnaissance family destroyed Ela's battalion with surprising efficiency. Seeing the young man's reaction, the captain clarifies that this information was already in the report and that the troops were caught off guard. After a moment, he replies that if he were in his friend's place, he would have anticipated the elimination of his own battalion, as he considers himself the best in the group. Hearing the reply, Hemilas smiles and says he will set great expectations for him. Aboard a fast train, the journey toward the capital continues under a starry sky. Inside the carriage, Luca falls asleep while reflecting on the exhausting days of the mission. His thoughts lead him to Ela, Lilian, and the border city, the place she dreamed of reaching. Soon, the image of the young woman's death resurfaces, executed by Ela, the man she considered her hero. At that moment, he concluded that his presence was what forced his friend's hand, stopping him from fleeing with her. Even mourning for them, the young man clings to the fact that he achieved what he wanted by saving Ela. Back in the capital, the 2 are placed in recovery capsules to rest. As recognition, only the 2 of them receive the 7th rank crossed sword medal among all the guards in training. On a terrace overlooking the city, Luca meets the blonde and questions the irony of receiving a Medal of Honor. Next, the young man admits he did not expect Lilian's death, as he believed the other would fight the Imperial Guard for her. With his gaze lost on the horizon, Ela confirms he would have tried if Luca hadn't been there. The blonde then mentions his family's happiness over the medal, despite their connection with the Reconnaissance, and suggests that his friend give up the soldier's career. The suggestion makes him reflect on the battalion that Ela sacrificed for love, leading him to consider the possibility of giving up as well. Finally, the blonde confesses that his family pressures him to become a guard and expresses that it would have been better if he had died in her place. Right after, Luca lands a quick and strong blow to Ela's stomach. While the blonde complains about the pain, his companion warns him to be careful with his words, reminding him that organs can be replaced. With that, the young man turns away, lamenting his own weakness. He then concludes aloud that even if he were stronger, the outcome would have been the same. Ela then quietly asks what it was that he did. Faced with the question, the other remains silent. Observing him, the young man realizes that he is not a killer and that, even after everything, he couldn't save Lilian. With that certainty, his hand opens and the medal falls, shattering into pieces on the ground. The scene confirms that he does not belong to the Empire, as ships cross the city's sky. Next, Ela announces that he will go home for a few months, since it has been 4 years since he last returned. Before they part, Luca asks about Lilian's escape, and the blonde reveals that she was running away from an arranged marriage for money. Ela then details that the condition for the family's money was that the girl would be raised as the deceased wife of the groom, without being able to choose anything. The revelation shocks the young man, who understands the abuse she suffered since birth, while the blonde confirms that Claude was the only one who treated her with kindness. Luca finally understands that the commander was trying to introduce him to the girl. Right after, Ela bursts into laughter. In the middle of his laughter, he reveals that he tricked Claude together with Lilian by saying he was the son of the Centurion, and is surprised that he believed it. Ela then explains that the lie stuck because everyone knew how well Hemilas treated him, in addition to him belonging to the Cthia family. With that, the blonde reveals that Claude believed that if Luca got Lilian pregnant, she would be free, leaving the young man perplexed with the plan. The conversation makes him conclude that, although he is his friend, Ela is capable of deceiving and even killing his own subordinates to achieve his goals. Even after this realization, the trust he places in his friend remains unshaken. Sometime later, the young man meets Kinuan, who greets him by calling him a war hero. Upon entering the room, the instructor congratulates him on the medal, even knowing that the visit is to watch him at the Centurion's order. The young man downplays the importance of the medal, stating that it is only rank 7 and doesn't compare to the instructor's deeds. He then mentions that the Centurion's chief sent him to learn how to deal with subordinates, which amuses Kinuan. The instructor then asks if his men didn't follow his orders, but Luca defends them, saying they were excellent. Then, with a smile, the instructor analyzes the response and concludes that the problem is that Luca is too soft. However, unfazed, the young man explains that he preferred to take the risk alone rather than use his men, but that even so they were able to make it to the end. Nevertheless, Kinuan disagrees and warns him that by fighting on the front line, he overloads his brain and uses up resources that should be spent protecting his subordinates. From this, the doubt arises whether he should have used his companions, but the instructor states that they should have chosen to sacrifice themselves, not been sent to their death. He then recalls how the young man helped Gilda and Gabriel, stating that both would be happy to repay the favor, which seems obvious to his listener. Next, Kinuan advises that it is necessary to build bonds with subordinates, but at the same time maintain emotional distance so as not to hesitate to use them when necessary. Even so, the young man denies that he would do such a thing, which leads the other to say that's why he likes him, calling him good boy. Continuing, the instructor reveals his secret to keeping the upper hand in any human relationship: be loved, but do not love in return. At that moment, Luca asks what to do if his mind cannot handle the sacrifice of others because of guilt or conscience. Faced with the question, Kinuan is direct, advising him to get used to it, otherwise he will never be able to stand above others. Soon standing up, the young man declares that he will try to be better at sacrificing his men next time. With a satisfied smile, the instructor approves the answer, calling him good boy once again. The next day, he waits alone on a transport platform. Under the open sky, the young man keeps his gaze fixed straight ahead. Meanwhile, back in room, he receives the unexpected order from his captain to go to Cthia Academy. Then, Himeles explains that it is tradition to send the best first, and that Ela refused the offer to spend more time at home. Hearing this, the young man concludes that the blonde still hasn't managed to overcome recent events. However, the captain warns him that he doesn't understand noble society and cannot continue like this if he wants to be part of the Cthia family. Faced with the warning, he accepts the mission, while Himeles informs him that a guide will be sent. Soon after, the officer expresses confidence that he will enjoy the experience, and the moment of departure finally arrives. As the conversation ends, a transport craft lands on the platform right in front of them. From inside the aircraft, the guide stares at him coldly and orders him to get inside. Once inside, the young man finds the guide seated, watching his arrival with arms crossed. But as he tries to introduce himself, he is cut off by a curt response rejecting formalities. Given her demeanor and tone, he wonders if he might be dealing with a noble of his own age. Soon after, he asks if she is indeed the guide sent by the captain, receiving a reply dripping with disdain. Without hesitation, he calls her Miss of the Cthia family, visibly surprising her. Her first reaction is to ask how he discovered her true identity. He then explains it was just a guess, since only someone from that family would so openly disdain Himeles' orders. Finally, he deduces she is the Centurion's daughter, sent to prove the promise of adoption. A faint smile appears as he imagines himself carrying that new surname. Then he confronts the girl, stating that he knows who gave the order she is following. Introducing herself, the young woman reveals she is Giselle Cthia and warns him not to act like a needy pet. With his back to her, the young man begins to apologize for the possible offense. However, in the middle of his apology, he stops himself, remembering he didn't endure so much just to bow to a noble. With a sigh, he leans back in his seat and states that the chief will understand his position. Right after, he proposes that they simply follow orders. She guides, he obeys, and asks if that's fine. Turning her face away, the young woman also leans back in her seat, remaining silent. Moments later, the craft takes off and flies across the sky of the futuristic city. Next, the transport lands on a platform and both disembark in silence. Ahead, she orders him to follow her, as she will take him directly to his assigned dormitory. On the way, something catches his attention. An imposing statue stands out along the path. At the base of the monument, an inscription greets Emperor Deno Cthia, the father of the nation. Looking upward, he finally realizes where he is. Before him stands Cthia Academy, a place he had only known from the news. Meanwhile, the pair's arrival draws curiosity from a group of students. As they walk, The others notice their uniforms and identify him as an Imperial Guard. Suddenly, a white-haired student shoves another out of the way. The one shoved falls hard to the ground, right at the newcomer's feet. With a cold look, the young man comments that it's a waste of a good implant. Then, Giselle turns and asks why he's still standing there. Right after, she scolds him for not wearing colorful clothes, as soldiers in training don't need that. From a distance, a couple watches while she complains about following the academy's rules. Suddenly, a young man named Felix appears with a smile and a friendly wave. After that, he approaches and says he's happy to see him, as he thought he wouldn't come without Ela. Without delay, the newcomer introduces himself to Giselle and asks for a moment alone with his colleague. Promptly, she agrees to wait for him right there. As soon as she steps away, the friend hugs him and whispers that the rumors about the Centurion's fondness for him must be true. Right after, he speculates that the captain might want to make him his son-in-law, but the idea is dismissed as nonsense. The simple thought of becoming Hamilla's son-in-law makes him conclude it would be impossible, as the two wouldn't last a day together. Therefore, he reveals that he already has an agreement to be adopted in exchange for keeping an eye on Kinuan during his stay. As they move away from the guide, his companion asks if any body modification has already been done. Next, an object marked 001 is discreetly placed in his hand. The item resting in his palm leaves him visibly surprised at the unexpected discovery. Soon after, the friend says goodbye along with the group, commenting on the popularity of soldiers at the academy. Returning to the guide's side, he concludes that the information obtained will be useful and will make coexistence easier. One of the revelations made was about the dormitory, identified by a symbol engraved on the wall. It was the space reserved for residents of the lower sectors and nobles in financial decline. However, the news does not discourage him, and his determined gaze remains unchanged in the face of reality. As he moves forward, he reflects that even here there is a hierarchy, and that it wouldn't be any fun if it were easy. The two then enter the building to carry out a full inspection of the place. Inside the room, a robot presents the accommodations, and the young man describes it as a true palace. With his hand resting on the table, he questions whether this place really houses commoners and bankrupt nobles. Finally, he throws himself into the chair, becoming aware that he is in the best academy in the Empire. Standing in front of him, the guide informs him that this will be where he will remain lodged. Soon after, she shares her personal number for emergencies, which leads him to question her apparent hostility. Her answer, stating she is just following orders, makes him conclude that she takes responsibility for her role. As he watches her walk away, he comments that he will probably never call, and hears that this is to be expected. Before leaving, she pauses for a moment and offers one last direct piece of advice. The warning is to avoid getting involved with the leader of the dormitories, which immediately sparks his curiosity. She then reveals that the girl is the most troubled in the entire academy, just as a female figure walks down the hallway. Alone in his room, he murmurs a question about the reason for such a warning. Right after, the sound of the doorbell interrupts him, and his door opens, revealing a young woman. The newcomer introduces herself as Barbara, the dormitory leader, exactly the person Giselle had warned him about. In response, the young man formally introduces himself as an Imperial Guard in training. Immediately, his cybernetic eye activates to analyze her closely. While greeting him, Barbara observes him carefully, noticing his simple clothing and the lack of a noble surname. Recalling Giselle's warning, he replies that he has just arrived, brushing off the initial alert. The conversation continues, and upon learning he is from the lower sectors, Barbara expresses admiration for him becoming a guard. In return, he compliments her, saying that being dormitory leader is also a great achievement, which makes her smile. From that moment, he concludes that she must also have worked hard to reach her current position. With that, the young woman invites him to follow her, stating that showing the dormitory is her duty as leader. At that instant, he processes the fact that she barely had any free time between class and her bath to come meet him. Watching her walk away, he considers her someone efficient with her time. The scene then shifts to the imposing main building of the academy. In the main hall, he and Giselle become the center of attention, attracting everyone's gaze. With a sharp look, the girl silently studies her companion for a moment. Then she informs him that, by her father's orders, they will have classes together for an entire week. At that moment, a familiar voice calls for Giselle, making him turn to identify the person. The voice belongs to Barbara, who approaches and greets Giselle casually. Without hesitation, the noble sharply orders Barbara to leave immediately. With a withdrawn posture, the dormitory leader responds that she only meant to greet her. Giselle turns once more to reinforce that she has nothing to say to her colleague. She then hurries him along, reminding him that he cannot be late for the first class. Even while being led away, the young man looks back toward Barbara. The girl's posture, now alone, contrasts with the image of a dormitory leader. Finally, he faces forward, leaving the scene behind with a serious expression. He then comments about their relationship, but Giselle only replies that they entered the academy at the same time. Even without understanding, he recalls the warning about Barbara while watching her walk away down the hallway. Soon after, he decides to ignore the rumors and focus on his goal of becoming a noble within the next 2 months. Later, he sits on a bench in the hallway, waiting for classes to begin. Forced to attend for a week, he starts spinning an object in his hand to pass the time. Suddenly, another student confronts him directly, questioning what his relationship is with Miss Giselle. The student's expression changes drastically, revealing his romantic interest in Giselle. Messing with the boy, he quickly mocks him for liking her, which makes him furious. In an instant, he grabs the other's wrist and pushes it forward, drawing a cry of pain. Right after, he scolds himself for taking out his frustration on someone else. With teary eyes, the student asks again if he really has no connection with Giselle. Sitting together on the bench, he tries to ask a question, but the boy asks why he should answer. To get the information, he proposes telling Giselle that he's a nice guy in exchange for the reason behind her hatred for Barbara. The student begins to explain that it wasn't always like this, claiming it's all due to a curse. Specifying that the curse is Barbara's, he says that incidents with hacked androids always happen around her. Although he doesn't believe it's her fault, the other insists that what's strange is that she keeps seeking friendships. With that, he reveals that Barbara became dorm leader because no one else wanted the work-heady position. At that exact moment, he points to the girl in the hallway who is being approached by a group of classmates. One of the girls in the group pours a liquid over Barbara, soaking her clothes completely. The group then surrounds her, while the girl who spilled the drink claims it was an accident. The same girl offers to wash her clothes, but Barbara politely refuses, saying she'll change in her room. Turning to her friends, the young woman mockingly asks if they heard her kindness being refused. With a threatening look, she insists that Barbara hand over the clothes immediately. Her hands tremble as she clutches the fabric, unable to react to the intimidation. Sitting on the bench, the two watch the scene unfold from a distance. Thus, he understands that something similar must have happened before, explaining why she needed to shower the day they met. With his weapon in hand, he decides that Barbara is lucky he's around. Fueled by his pent-up bad mood, he prepares to throw his daggers. With a swift strike, he hits the cup, making the girl scream in fright. Then he orders her to stop the provocation, stating that he makes no gender distinction in a fight. Faced with the direct threat, the girl and her friends retreat in fear. Now he positions himself between Barbara and the group, creating a protective barrier. Still surprised by the intervention, the dorm leader calls his name softly. He partially turns toward her, keeping his alert stance. With the situation under control, Barbara finally manages to thank him for his help. With a smile, he wonders if his closeness to Barbara will now make him a target for the androids. Next, the student warns him that the girl's name is Kano and that he's messed with the wrong person. Even with the warning, he says he doesn't care if her family is powerful, because nothing will happen to them. The student then reveals that the Kano family controls a gang in the lower sectors and that they're probably already looking for him. Desperate, he explains that the reason for the attack is that Khalees's boyfriend was also affected by Barbara's curse. He simply processes the information in silence, holding on to what he's just heard. The two's conversation is interrupted by Giselle's arrival, as she approaches with a look of disdain. Not missing the opportunity, the young man teases the student, suggesting he tell Giselle how he feels. The other steps back, stammering, saying he'd rather admire her from afar before asking him to speak well of him and fleeing. Seeing the scene, Giselle remarks that he's already made a friend, and the young man then reveals that the boy's name is Enrico Lacan. With that, she admits that Enrico gives her the creeps, feeling like he's always watching her from somewhere. At her response, he realizes it will be impossible to change Giselle's opinion of the boy. Further ahead, a teacher confronts Luca directly, asking if he really used a knife against a female student. Sitting in his chair, director Guide Albern advises him to take it easy, even knowing how suffocating the academy environment can be. Before Director Guide, he simply agrees with the warning he's received. The director compares him to a wolf among sheep, and the young man replies that the problem is the sheep don't act like they're going to be bitten. With that, Guide explains that although the students may look like sheep, among them are monsters in sheep's clothing. The director adds to the warning, stating that these monsters are even more frightening than wolves. Returning the young man's weapon, Guide advises him to be careful, and he promises to remember the warning. As he walks away, he reflects that his real interest is not in the Academy's monsters. His main focus is to uncover the truth about the witch's curse as the scene shifts to a forest at night. Walking alone along the trail behind the gym, he prepares for what's to come. Aware that news about Barbara has already spread, he expects the curse's robots to come after him soon. His steps come to a halt as he senses a presence approaching in the darkness of the forest. An unfamiliar voice questions him, asking if he is the newly arrived soldier named Luca. Moments later, a man steps in front of him, remarking that he was found by some low-level thug. Then the man and his companions inform him that Cthia sends her regards as a rule of the Kano family. With a mocking smile, the thug provokes him, reminding him that he's just an imperial guard in training. Surrounded by the aggressors, the young man shows complete disinterest in the threat, asking if they really think they can beat him. Even so, the leader of the group offers him a chance to apologize, but he responds with a counter-threat, saying they can still leave with their organs intact. Unfazed, the thug prepares for the attack with a defiant expression. The attacker lunges with a powerful punch, and the young man acknowledges that the technique is surprisingly good. As the punch draws near, the enemy dares him to dodge the blow, but he remains ready to respond. Suddenly, a patrol robot appears and asks if anyone there needs help. The unexpected appearance of the machine causes panic among the thugs, who don't understand why a patrol is there. With the robot's arrival, the leader decides to retreat, but promises to return to settle the score. The aggressors flee in a hurry, claiming they're not crazy enough to fight a robot that continues offering assistance. Without hesitation, the young man dismisses the help and orders the robot to leave. Unable to follow the command, the machine begins to malfunction, repeating that such an action is impossible. As the robot glitches, the thug watches the scene, unable to make sense of what's happening. Suddenly, the patrol's eye glows brightly, signaling a change in its behavior. With surprising speed, the machine launches itself at the thugs, taking down one of them. Another attacker shields himself with his arms, now splattered with the remains of his companion. The leader steps back, glancing toward Luca. Immediately, the robot prepares for another attack, leaping toward its next target. The thug's expression twists as the strike draws near. At the last moment, the young man intercepts with a powerful kick, sending the robot flying and stopping the assault. On the ground and shaken, the thug shouts that Barbara's curse is real. He simply looks down at him, stating that an academy student shouldn't believe in curses. Right after, the machine charges directly toward the young man. Watching the robot, he realizes it's operating at maximum output. From this, he concludes that the system has calculated it will need all its power for the fight. As the robot recovers, he understands that this isn't just a simple mechanical malfunction. In fact, he realizes the machine is being controlled by someone, like a puppet. With a smile on his face, he prepares to finally have some fun with the fight about to begin. Next, he dodges to the side, avoiding a strike for a moment. At that moment, he notices that the android's movement is clean despite being awkward, and wonders if the machine is running an advanced combat program. Even while facing multiple opponents, he finds the challenge far too easy and knows he needs something that will truly test him. Thus, he advances and delivers a direct kick to the chest of one of the androids. During the fight, he identifies a peculiarity in this opponent that sets it apart from standard models. Faced with the threat, he simply taunts it, telling it to surpass his expectations and attack with everything it has. Then he leaps onto the opponent's shoulders, stating that this won't work like that. Using the momentum, he finishes the android with a decisive blow, questioning how the machine expects to improve while getting distracted. With the opponent destroyed on the ground, a retreat request message is emitted from its wreckage before it shuts down. Seeing the last enemy fall, he laments that the fight ended too soon, as it wasn't nearly enough for him. In this way, the group's leader quickly leaves the forest. Already far away, he simply comments that it's a pity. Then security drones appear in the sky, illuminating his position with spotlights. Sometime later, he is sitting alone outside one of the academy buildings. After the incident, the security battalion asks for his cooperation to begin an investigation into what happened. In the interrogation room, investigator Gillian Campbell states that the culprit is within the academy and that everyone will be investigated. Asked about the possibility of the culprit being from the lower sectors, Campbell denies it, explaining that it's impossible to get past the firewalls. He then asks why, being only a soldier in training, he would be suitable for the investigation, and the investigator replies that it's because of his ability to use Archivictima. Faced with the reaction, Campbell decided to tell him one more thing upon noticing his expression. The investigator revealed that users of that technique are monitored on a separate list, and that the answer to why lies with the person who taught it to him. At the mention, the image of Kinuan came to mind, leading him to question who his instructor really was. Right after, Giselle confronted him, asking what had happened and why he accepted her father's orders, reminding him of the warning to stay away from Barbara. Without looking directly at her, he explained that he couldn't stand by while a defenseless person was being mistreated. With that, Giselle asked if he would do the same thing again, to which he confirmed he would have no other choice. She then proposed talking to Kalesa Kananov to make a deal, believing a conversation would resolve the situation. Hearing that, he observed her in silence, trying to understand why Giselle was so determined to solve that problem. He soon concluded that the girl's confidence came from the certainty that she could control Kalesa. After that conclusion, he finally agreed and said they would talk to her. With a smile on his face, he added that he would prefer not to draw the chief's attention. Right after, he added that there was also something he wanted to check personally. In the meeting room, Cthia was already defending herself, claiming that Barbara had hit her boyfriend first. Sitting across from her, the young man asked if she was sure she hadn't sent her boyfriend after Barbara on purpose. At the unexpected question, the young woman froze for a moment. Pointing to the board, he explained that her boyfriend had used a Kano family symbol to take revenge, just like they had tried to do with him. With everyone seated at the table, he asked directly if Cthia needed an excuse to go after Barbara. The young woman then stood up abruptly and shouted for him to shut up, denying she had done anything wrong. As soon as she protested, Giselle intervened and asked her to calm down. With a serious expression, she cut the discussion short and firmly said that was enough. Next, she asked if Cthia was simply going to ignore what he had just said. Then she asked Luca to leave them alone for a few minutes, and he agreed before stepping out of the room. Outside, he confirmed his suspicion about Giselle's control and wondered why she hadn't stopped Cthia from going after Barbara earlier. He considered it would have been easy for her to do something during the 2 months she had been at the academy instead of waiting for a forced deal. Shortly after, Giselle came out of the room and complained that she hadn't expected another scene from her rival, saying she thought he didn't want trouble. With that, he explained that he was only testing a theory about android control, and she asked if he was acting like a detective. He replied that investigators were already handling the case, and seeing her reaction, he clarified that he was impressed she had silenced Cthia with a single sentence. Giselle then explained that her family name carries weight in noble society, and that's why the other girl couldn't ignore her words. Without hesitation, he asked if that was why she had ordered Cthia to harass Barbara. After the noble asked what he was talking about, the young man replied that it wouldn't be unusual for someone who considered Barbara an important piece to use her resources as she wished. Annoyed by the accusation, she grabbed him by the collar and told him to watch what he said. Without backing down, she was provoked with the question of whether her mechanical enhancements had affected her brain. With that, Giselle immediately released him, took a step back, and apologized. As she walked away, she warned him to be ready for the consequences if he caused more trouble. Even suspecting Giselle was the prime suspect, Luca noticed there was something strange about the whole situation. Soon after, he noticed her hand trembling and wondered why she was acting that way. Watching her walk away down the hallway, he concluded that Archie's Victima's reflexes only confused him even more. Later, he was sitting next to Barbara on a bench, while other students watched them from a distance. Suddenly, the girl approached and offered him a tray full of sandwiches, asking him to take them. Not understanding, the young man asked what it meant, and she explained it was her way of thanking him for saving her from Cthia. Then she asked if she could keep making food for him, but Luca prepared to refuse in order to avoid misunderstandings. After the implicit refusal, Barbara just lowered her head and stayed silent by his side. With her head still down, she said she didn't care about any kind of misunderstanding. Hearing that, he wondered if she really liked him, but felt that something was still wrong. With that, he confronted her about the risks of continuing to talk to him, and the girl simply replied that she didn't know what to do. To test her, he revealed that Cthia had been bothering her because Giselle forced her to, and that she wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. Faced with his surprised reaction, Barbara simply confirmed that she knew very well about that situation. He then pressed her, asking if she knew the real reason why Giselle hated her so much. Right after, her expression changed completely as she asked what reason she would have to tell him that. Luca recalled the provocation he had made, as he wanted to see how Barbara would respond. While questioning her, he remembered the strange feeling she gave him the entire time. At that moment, the words of director Gid echoed in his mind, warning him about a wolf in sheep's clothing. From her reaction, he understood that the wolf in sheep's clothing was none other than Barbara. Back in his room, he reported through a communicator that he had met Cthulhu's boyfriend. Through the hologram, investigator Campbell confirmed that Cthulhu had purposely sent her ex-boyfriend after Barbara, praising Luca's judgment. With that confirmation, he understood that Cthulhu had staged the situation just to have an excuse. When he asked if the investigator would use his authority to investigate a suspect, Campbell replied that it would be risky, as this was already the 6th case and someone had died. Given that, he stated that his only intention was to catch the culprit who thought they could get away with it. Luca then suggested investigating Barbara, but Campbell dismissed the possibility, claiming it was impossible for a student from the lower sectors to control androids. He quickly countered that the same logic didn't apply to nobles, and the investigator agreed, explaining that they could interfere with android production. Before ending the call, Campbell mentioned he had one more piece of information that might help. The investigator then revealed that Barbara was sponsored by the Custoria family, leaving him in silence. After ending the communication, he admitted the information was useful and that he needed to think more about it. He reflected that the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit, but something was still missing. Frustrated with the useless work, he decided he would try speaking directly with Giselle to get answers. Soon after, he moved to put his new plan into action. Observing a training field, he remembered what Ela had said about nobles needing to prove their worth to avoid being discarded. Next, he found Giselle in a workshop, noticing that she also had a very hardworking side. He then remembered how different and more hostile she had been when they first met. As soon as she noticed his presence, Giselle asked him why he was there. Upon hearing that he just wanted to see her, she spat out the water she was drinking. She quickly told him to cut the jokes and say what he really wanted, as she was busy. He then asked her to stop lying and, when questioned, revealed that he had been officially invited to assist in the investigation. Unfazed, she simply reminded him of her position as the daughter of the Centurion chief. He then revealed that he knew her family sponsored Barbara and asked if that was the reason she wanted her out of the academy. With that, Giselle explained that she hated her because of the curse, but when confronted about their friendship, she tried to end the conversation. Luca stated that the security officers viewed the android incident as a clear case of malicious intent. He then pointed to her as the prime suspect, which made her protest and claim that she had also been one of the victims. Unshaken, he replied that it was a common tactic for culprits to pose as victims and that she had all the tools for the crime. Seeing her reaction, Luca told her to calm down and clarified that he wasn't directly suspecting her. He then only asked her to tell him everything she knew, believing that maybe he could get something out of it. At that very moment, Barbara appeared in the hallway and greeted him, saying she had been looking for him. She then explained that she was worried when she couldn't find him in his usual spot. Immediately, he wondered how she had located him, since he was certain no one had been following him. He soon noticed that her expression wasn't that of someone troubled and wondered how she had stopped him from getting the information in just 10 minutes. With that, he told her to wipe that smile off her face as it was bothering him. Faced with the accusation, she questioned the reason for his words. She then tried to justify herself, saying that she liked him for saving her from Cthia. Before she could continue talking about a misunderstanding, Luca hurled a chair, which shattered upon impact. Seeing the scene, Giselle asked him what he was doing. With a dark expression, he said that up until that moment he only wanted to kill time, but he was already tired of it. He then turned to Barbara and accused her of making a fool out of him. Behind the debris, she remained crouched, calling out her own name. In response, his expression changed completely as he said that Barbara had no idea what he was talking about. All around him, his gaze left Giselle frozen for a moment. Then he walked past her and continued down the hallway. Turning to Luca, she said she would leave the food there for him to enjoy later. Right after, she turned and began to walk away while he simply watched. Before she could leave, Barbara came up from behind and grabbed her by the shoulder. With a smile, she hugged her and said it was good to see her again. While whispering something in Giselle's ear, she let out a laugh. Before leaving, she said goodbye, saying she would see them around. As soon as she left, Luca and Giselle were alone in silence in the middle of the ruined room. Immediately, Giselle fell to her knees on the floor, while he remained standing beside her. Seeing the scene, a sigh of realization escaped Luca. That proved everything, revealing the true culprit, the relationship between them, and who the innocent one in the case was. Approaching her, he simply called her name, but she asked him not to ask anything else. Then she advised him to just enjoy his time at the academy normally until the day he left. With the wreckage around them, she ended the conversation with a plea for him to stop. Although a call from Luca to Giselle appears on holographic screen, it goes unanswered. Meanwhile, the young man recalls having reported the situation to the chief Centurion, since the young woman had begun avoiding him after the incident. Even so, even after the report, Himilas responded in an unexpected way, leaving the case in Luca's hands to handle as he saw fit. However, the commander's decision seemed strange, since the Imperial Guards could resolve everything quickly, especially with Giselle herself involved. Despite being only a guard in training, he felt the weight of his responsibility. Thus, his duty to follow higher orders set him on a path of great pressure. With that, the young man accepted the mission, aware of the high expectations placed on him. In the present, the call is declined, and he reacts upon seeing that the connection was rejected. At that moment, suspicion falls on Barbara, but logic indicates it would be impossible for a student from the lower sectors to control the Academy's androids. Soon, the conversation reveals that nobles can interfere with androids, suggesting that Cthia used Barbara to locate and attack the girl. While searching for another way to contact her, the young man is surprised by a call from Enrico. Excited, his friend runs toward him and asks if he spoke well of him to Giselle. With a smile, Luca confirms that he did, taking advantage of the opportunity that had presented itself. Shortly after, the young woman was clear with Enrico about her feelings. In the meeting, she said she wasn't interested and admitted that his presence made her uncomfortable. Then she asked the young man to stop following her, leaving him in tears with a bouquet of flowers in his hand. He simply watches the boy run away from the place. After using Enrico for his own purposes, he promises himself that one day he will help him. With a new plan in mind, he leaves his hiding spot. He soon calls out to Giselle Custoria, which makes her confirm that she knew he was there. When the young woman threatens to report his behavior to her father, the young man interrupts her, saying that it would do no good. He then reveals that he has already informed Himilas about her involvement in the situation. The girl indignantly questions him, but he coldly replies that he had no reason to warn her. The answer makes her step back, completely unsettled by the news. With that, she laments that her reputation and position in the family have been ruined in seconds. Overcome with anger, she grabs him by the collar and yells that it's all his fault for showing up. Calmly, Luca holds her and offers help in exchange for the truth, but she scoffs at the offer of a mere guard in training. To surprise her, he asks what she would do if she knew that he would soon be part of the Custoria family. Faced with her surprise, the young man asks if she never thought it strange that someone like her was assigned as his guide at the academy. With that, he reveals himself to be a generational genius with a Medal of Honor, as well as having the support of the chief Centurion. Then he promises to help her regardless of the problems, leading the young woman to question the truth of that offer. Thus, he explains that by solving the case, his chances of receiving more support from the chief Centurion will increase, allowing them both to grow together. With that, she comes closer, and finally admits that she was the one controlling the androids and who created Barbara's curse. Both sit down as the young woman begins to tell the story. The narrative begins by revealing that Barbara was not just an acquaintance, but someone she trusted. It all began 3 years ago, when curiosity about who her family was sponsoring led her to meet the girl, who seemed nice and skilled. According to her, the problem began out of jealousy when a boy approached her friend, who was popular for her personality. Out of immaturity and fear of losing the company, she decided to use a robot disguised as an android just to scare the young man. She then continued her explanation, detailing that she had placed a recording in the robot so it would tell the boy to stay away from Barbara and follow it at night. However, the prank had serious consequences. The boy injured his head, left the academy because of the trauma, and she disposed of the robot out of fear. Since the incident had caused an injury, she ended up being investigated, and Barbara, who had seen her tampering with the robots, discovered everything. It was then that her friend suggested she pose as a victim to divert suspicion, and the young woman used her right to repair androids to install a chip given to her. Without understanding why, the android went berserk and attacked her, making her the second victim of the incident. From that moment on, the curse truly began, and Barbara's behavior also changed. Soon after, the girl began making strange requests, demanding that the other keep her distance and claiming she needed more victims. With that revelation, she ended up deceived and trapped in a situation that became impossible to resolve on her own. Thus, she was completely in Barbara's hands, with no way to escape. Suddenly, a visual interference appears with the image of the one responsible, who repeatedly asks if Giselle has told their secret to a boy. Her voice calls her a traitor, making her react in pain. The big question is how Barbara managed to hack into the other's personal device, which should have had maximum security. As a strange noise intensifies, it becomes clear that the sound isn't coming from her device and that they need to get out of there immediately. The mechanical sound turns out to be from a nearby attack device activating. A shot is suddenly fired, hitting Luca squarely and throwing them both back from the impact. Hidden behind a pillar, he tries to catch his breath after the surprise attack. He then moves toward the young woman, who remains unconscious on the ground. To stop the bleeding, he tears off a piece of his own shirt and ties it. The shot came from an attack drone, and a direct confrontation could worsen his injury. To make matters worse, the only weapon he's carrying is a pocket knife. The silence of the place suggests that no one else has noticed what happened there. Finally, his expression changes, revealing his resolve to retaliate directly against Barbara. Soon he realizes that Giselle has woken up. She asks if the shot hurt, and Luca confirms that of course it did. Then, a burst of gunfire forces them to take cover behind a pillar. Hidden, the young man laments not knowing the drone's exact location to counterattack. However, a new idea comes to him, and he calls out to Giselle, who answers immediately. He then asks her for a mirror. In the object's reflection, the attack drone finally reveals itself. As soon as he spots it, Luca throws his knife toward the target. With the impact, a large explosion destroys the drone and sends him flying backward. Suddenly, his communicator activates on its own, leaving him confused. Through the device, he tries to call Giselle, who is only a few meters away. The young woman also tries to use her communicator, but says she can't operate anything. Barbara's voice echoes through the communicator, questioning her for betraying her after she had done everything to protect her. As the voice mentions Luca, her wrist is suddenly gripped tightly. With a hard squeeze, the communicator is shut off as he says there's no need to keep listening to that lunatic. He then holds the girl in his arms and says they need to get to a safe place first. While moving away with her, Felix speaks into the communicator, confirming that he has just arrived at the location. Upon meeting him, Luca asks about the orders, and the new ally explains that he wasn't informed about the operation. Giselle is surprised by the conversation and asks if her father is behind the decisions, and Felix confirms. The confirmation leaves her speechless, as she concludes she's been abandoned by him. As the young woman grows desperate, the guard thinks about not jumping to conclusions. Even as the chief's daughter, she is still a civilian, and special treatment could jeopardize the mission. Turning to Felix, the conversation continues while the noblewoman remains silent. The ally points to Luca's arm and asks if it hurts, but he downplays the injury. With a smile, Felix concludes that if the wound isn't a problem, they can keep going. He then asks if Luca can move at standard speed, and the young man replies there's no reason to worry. As soon as Felix reports his location through the communicator, saying he's with both of them, an unexpected shot hits him, tearing off his mechanical arm on impact. Quickly, they take cover to avoid another shot. With his weapon in hand, Luca realizes the shots came from very close by, but he can't detect any presence. The situation feels strange, as if the royal guards themselves had fired, and Felix questions Barbara's ability. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice speaks up, proposing a conversation, and Luca is surprised to recognize the shooter. The voice continues, revealing that if he had aimed at Felix's head, he might not have survived the attack. Luca asks him if he has any idea who he's talking to. The shooter replies that he knows they're just guards in training and having no time to waste, will get straight to the point. The order is clear and direct. He wants them to hand over Giselle Custoria. The young man understands this as a ransom kidnapping, but the attacker explains that his princess wants the woman. The threat becomes personal, and the mention of you makes Luca realize that Felix has been attacked again. His companion looks at him, completely paralyzed by the assault. The scene before him leaves Luca frozen in surprise. The shooter appears in camouflage and lifts Felix by the neck, leaving him incapacitated in the air. Soon, the adversary fully emerges, wearing a combat suit that completely conceals his identity. The sight of the enemy reveals a targeting system focused on the path ahead. With a fully camouflaged combat body, the enemy could not be detected before. Facing the threat, Giselle grips his hand firmly, aware of the complication. Then he steps in front of the young woman and tells her he's going to buy her time, instructing her to run as fast as she can on his signal. The girl tries to protest against the escape plan. However, with no time to argue, Luca holds her and orders her to follow his instructions. After a quick countdown, the two prepare to act at the right moment. At the signal, she runs as fast as she can while he stays behind. Thus, Luca takes aim with his weapon as Giselle moves swiftly in the background. Moments later, his shots pass by the enemy. With another shot, he realizes his opponent has incredibly fast reflexes. Then the adversary reveals he doesn't want to have to kill two freshmen. Even without understanding, Luca questions the term freshmen and whether they aren't actually older. In a quick motion, the figure warns him to pay attention if he doesn't want to die. As he defends himself, the cadet concludes that his opponent is no ordinary fighter, but a royal guard. The attacker reveals that his real target is Giselle and that he plans to deal with him first. Thrown back, the young man realizes that if the fight continues like this, defeat will be inevitable. Still falling, he tries to quickly find a solution to this situation. Within this new view of the field, he analyzes his opponent and drafts a new attack strategy. His analysis spots a weapon, leading him to wonder if Felix might have a knife. Thus, Luca quickly tosses his pistol, hitting a knife that was on the ground. He then manages to grab it in his hand and moves in for the counterattack. With a swift strike, his blade advances and clashes with the opponent's guard. As the guard is surprised to have been hit, he asks him if he's an Archi's combat arts user. With that, the adversary dodges the consecutive attacks and creates distance between them. After stepping back, the opponent acknowledges the young man's skill and says he'll finish with one last lesson. He then remarks that although they only played around a little, things have already gotten complicated. Noticing the change in the enemy's demeanor, Luca stays on guard with his blade. Wounded, he wonders about the opponent's hesitation and Giselle's safety. Realizing his difficulty in focusing, he knows he needs to end the fight quickly. The guard then warns him to step aside and not throw his life away like that. Luca takes a deep breath, thinking his opponent must be finding all of this amusing. With a clearer mind, he decides that his wound and the enemy's identity no longer matter. With that, he raises his blade, channeling his energy for a new decisive strike. Then he delivers a blow that accomplishes nothing. As he attacks, the opponent praises his training and asks if he wants to dedicate his life to the Empire. The attacker then looks him in the eye and asks if he really thinks he can't be killed. In response, Luca says the Empire is one thing, while blocking another strike with his blade. With the sword planted in the ground, he adds that the enemy's attitude is another matter entirely and is starting to annoy him. Hearing that, the adversary begins to laugh. He remarks that such a rebellious spirit is not well regarded in the Empire and introduces himself as Rick Kaiser, a Republican. With blood dripping, Luca asks him if he's a traitor, but Rick suggests the term resistance fighters. The cadet then smirks and says the other is barking too much. Rick replies that this is far more than a bark. With that, he begins to float in the air, surrounded by his energy. Soon, he charges forward at high speed, attacking the boy. With his bare hands, Luca manages to intercept Rick's advance. From the force of the impact, the boy's armored hand begins to shatter. In a renewed charge, the enemy attacks again and destroys the other arm of his opponent. Rick manages to grab him by the neck, saying this is his last chance to beg for his life. Despite being immobilized, the cadet flashes a defiant smile. With that, the opponent lifts him into the air with a single hand. Even in such a critical moment, Luca says what he wants. After hearing him out, Rick says that if the boy survives, he should give his regards to Kinuan. Then the last thing the young man registers is the sound of his own neck breaking. The scene then shifts to the facade of the Imperial Capital Army Hospital. In a bed, Felix wakes up calling for Luca while complaining of pain. Sitting beside him, the other replies that obviously it's going to hurt if he tries to talk because of his neck. Luca explains that Felix's brain was severely damaged because his neck was broken for too long, and he considers him lucky. He then recalls that Giselle arrived with 4 other guards and that without her quick action, he too would have been in critical condition. Jimenez then approaches and asks the cadet to remain calm and not get up. With that, the commander sits beside the bed to hear his subordinates report. The young man reports that Felix fulfilled his duty and fought to the very end. He then prepares to give the full account of events. After recounting the fight, he concludes his part by saying that's all. With that, Jimenez reveals that Rick Kaiser's real name is Rick Silva, one of the Empire's most wanted criminals. Surprised, the young man hears the commander explain that not all criminals are made public, especially when corruption is involved. The cadet then asks what he means by corruption in a supposedly perfect empire. Realizing that Rick was not the only traitor, Jimenez decides to tell him all the details of the mission. He reveals Operation Juliet, a 5-year plan to get close to the leadership of the anti-empire group known as Nemesis. While the commander explains that Nemesis is too organized for conventional methods, Luca asks if the operation failed because he didn't capture Rick. Even without understanding, Luca hears Jimenez reveal that the plan succeeded because they managed to infiltrate allies into the very heart of Nemesis. Soon after, he learns that Barbara is their ally, recruited by the group as a hacker. Hearing that she had been preparing for this for a long time to get their attention, the cadet clenches his fist in silence. With that, he concludes that all the sacrifices, from Felix's damaged brain to the abuse Giselle suffered, were nothing but disposable pieces. When asked if the young woman knows, Jimenez says no and insists it's better she remains unaware. The commander then asks if he knows why he's telling him all of this. With the word disposable in mind, the young man wonders if he will be discarded in such a miserable way without having achieved anything. As a digital panel appears in front of him, he is ordered to read and sign the document. The young man remains silent for a moment. Jimenez then welcomes him to the Custoria family, while the panel reveals it to be an adoption declaration in his name. In the hospital room, Luca sits by the bed while Felix remains unconscious. On a tray beside them, the needles used for treatment lie dirty. Some time ago, Jimenez explained that the documents would take time to be validated, and a new piece had been installed in Luca's spine. With the new implant removed from his body, he was warned he would feel pain and discomfort for a while. Lying in bed, Felix calls to him just as he is about to leave the room. Without turning around, the cadet simply confirms with his hand on his neck that he's already on his way out. With a final good luck, he turns and walks toward the exit. Now in the training center, Luca walks down a corridor while other students watch him. As he passes, he notices a panel displaying Barbara the witch. Even without fully understanding, he continues to process the fact that she was an infiltrated spy at Nemesis. He then recalls the way the girl acted, which didn't seem to be just an act. With that, he stops for a moment and gazes outside through the window. At that instant, he begins to wonder if his past in the orphanage and his meeting with Kinuan were mere coincidence. He then reflects on the events at the academy, questioning if he was really acting by his own choices. Even with these thoughts, he decides he did not climb out of the pit solely through his own effort. With a determined step, he pushes those doubts aside, saying he doesn't need to think about it. As he moves away from the window, he concludes that it's all fantasy and that the captain's information was a loyalty test. With his mechanical hand clenched, he decides he won't let this chance slip away. Standing before a door, he reinforces to himself that this is a unique opportunity to change his life. As soon as the door opens, Kinuan greets him and asks how his stay at the academy was. While the instructor serves tea, Luca replies that it was so much fun he almost didn't come back, and Kinuan expresses regret about what happened to Felix. As he sits down, he hears that his friend was an excellent recruit and receives a cup of tea. The young man stares at the drink for a moment, questioning the instructor's sincerity. Luca then informs him that Rick asked him to say hello and let him know he was fine. After sipping his tea, Kinuan identifies Rick Silva Nunez and says he never imagined he would become a traitor. The cadet notes that the two seemed close, and the man confirms they were colleagues, praising Rick's reflexes. When asked, Kinuan states that he would never have contact with a terrorist, and the young man concludes he can't report this to the captain. He explains that since it was something that could put his life at risk, he decided to speak to Kinuan first. With that, the instructor asks him why he cares so much about him. Without answering directly, Luca asks what the Archi's combat arts are. Kinuan then wants to know the reason for his curiosity. Next, Luca reveals that the Empire keeps a separate list for users of the technique, and that this was why Rick let him live. The instructor remains silent for a moment, sipping his tea. Soon, Kinuan praises him for being clever and calls him Luca Custoria. He approaches and says the cadet knows too much for someone of his background, and the young man replies that he understands perfectly well what that means. With that, the instructor begins explaining that 200 years ago, there was the first rebellion in the Empire's history. The rebellion was led by an immigrant advisor named Noel Muliska, who contributed combat strategies to the Empire. Judging direct confrontation impossible, Noel decided to face the Empire using intelligence. Thus, the Archi Victima technique was born from this strategy. Kinuan then corrects the name to Archi's combat arts. Hearing the story, Luca processes the fact that the technique he learned came from a traitor. The instructor concludes that with this skill, they managed to resist the Empire and continued selecting people who fit into it. With that, the young man recognizes that the technique is indeed useful in combat, especially when there are no other options. He then deduces that the style was created for fighters who needed an adaptable method because they weren't soldiers, and Kinuan confirms his analysis. The instructor continues, revealing that even during a large-scale Imperial operation, Noel and his allies managed to escape alive. Thus, they spread throughout all Imperial territories, recruiting disposable soldiers and attacking outposts. That way, it didn't matter if they were caught, since they only needed to cut the tail to ensure the main group's escape. The cadet states he can imagine it, since without combat bodies, the traitors would have no trouble blending in with civilians. Even without those bodies, they could still fight using Archi Victima and escape easily if caught. At that moment, he finally understands why Rick gave him the chance to survive and why the Empire keeps a separate list for users of the technique. When the young man asks how the Empire managed to locate the traitors, Kinuan interrupts, saying that all suspects were killed. He then reveals that there was no time to distinguish who was a civilian and who was a traitor. Some areas were completely purged to wipe them out, and thus the rebellion was finally contained, even though some Archi's users did not escape. When asked if this is the Empire's secret history, the instructor explains that they don't hide it, but they also don't tell it. With that, the three key points of the secret history are the betrayal of Noel Muliska, the massacre that followed to contain the rebellion, the fact that Kinuan, the Imperial Guard instructor, mastered the technique. Luca then asks if the reason the captain took him to the master was because he suspected he had ties to the traitors. Congratulating him, Kinuan confirms the young man's suspicion and then challenges him to present any evidence linking him to Nemesis. He then promises credit for giving him one last chance to breathe if such evidence exists. Even without understanding the attitude, Luca says he doesn't believe the instructor has any connection to them. Kinuan then warns him that the captain thinks differently and advises him to investigate his marks in the lower sectors. With that, the instructor assures him that it will definitely help. Luca then begins to question how much the captain already knew when sending him to speak with Kinuan. As he prepares to leave, the cadet states that he will report what he heard to the Centurion captain. As the door opens, Kinuan bids the young man farewell. Luca then walks alone across a walkway at sunset. The scene pulls back, revealing the vast Imperial city at dusk. He then stops at the edge of a building, gazing at the horizon. With a frustrated look, Luca concludes that they seem to be merely mocking his situation. He sees himself as nothing more than a chess piece in the struggle between the two, questioning whether he will survive in the middle of the crossfire. With that, he admits it's becoming harder and harder to read Kinuan, and that he wants to find out who he really is. After unsuccessfully searching for information about Noel Muliska, he decides he can't keep sinking like this. He concludes that his only option is to follow the instructor's advice. Next, he decides to search for traces of Kinuan in the lower sectors of the city. Thus, Luca recalls Hamilla's order to watch Kinuan, a suspected traitor who continues to act freely. That's why the suspect advised him to investigate the marks he had left in the lower sectors, assuring him it would help. In this way, the young man realizes that following the advice would take him straight into the dangerous lower sectors where Nemesis operates. So the situation presents itself as a possible loyalty test, a move between the Empire and the instructor to prove him. Even without being able to turn back, he decides to prepare to follow the trail left behind. Meanwhile, he understands that getting out of there will require the utmost caution and won't be easy at all. Soon after, he presents himself to Hamilla's to report everything, stating that he was provoked by his target. In the commander's presence, the young man exposes the connection between Kinuan and Rick Kaiser, questioning why they let such a suspect act freely. Faced with this, he states that he will continue to obey even if he's not allowed to know the whole truth. After a moment, Himeles looks him directly in the eye and declares that he trusts him. On the other hand, far from there, the superior reveals that the order to investigate him came from above, believing that he is the key to Nemesis. At that moment, Luca questions why they keep such a dangerous man as an instructor, and Himeles explains that it's the only way to keep him close. In response, he asks if that clears things up for him. Still in the room, the young man remarks that even after all this time, the suspect's self-control hasn't allowed for any opening. Thus, Himeles encourages him to continue, revealing that many soldiers have failed this task, but he is the only one who has made progress. The commander then adds that the instructor also likes him. Taking advantage of the moment, the soldier makes a request that goes beyond his rights as a soldier in training. Shortly after, a transport capsule descends from the sky at high speed. Inside it, the two sit facing each other during the trip. As they descend, Himeles asks if he is nervous. Honestly, the young man admits he would be lying if he said no. During the ride, he recalls the request he made to the Centurion chief. As a result, he received a free pass to move between the upper and lower sectors. In addition, he obtained authorization to carry a weapon and access funds for the investigation. His authorization also granted him access to restricted information available only to superiors. Despite all this support, the situation remains dangerous, requiring him to do everything he can to succeed. Still in the capsule, he confesses to Himeles that he fears being killed for knowing more than he should. Sincerely, Himeles confirms that if the superiors decided to cover up the case, he would be one of those eliminated. Even so, he promises to do everything he can, using his authority, to protect him. Right after, he hands over a family card that projects an authorization seal. With that, the young man recognizes that his life is now in the commander's hands, admitting that he is not a traditional person. At that moment, the officer instructs him to greet his new family, and he offers to act in a specific way. The answer is simple: just be himself to serve as motivation for his children. However, the word motivation leaves him uncertain about the real intent behind the request. Even without being able to imagine what the other is planning, he accepts that he must follow the rules to ensure his protection. As they approach their destination, he is told they are almost there. The transport capsule then accelerates its descent toward a large building. Observing the place, Himeles admits that even for him it's hard to like a place like that. Upon arrival, he reveals that he grew up in that very place. Then, the ship lands safely on the arrival platform. Soon after, both enter a luxurious and richly decorated hall. At that point, the commander advises him to rest first, explaining that the formal introductions will happen later. From the upstairs window, the young man observes a group of people gathered in the hall. Meanwhile, Himeles stands at the center of the crowd, receiving everyone's attention. He comments that the dynamic is not much different from the lower sectors, while questioning if this is the life he had always dreamed of. Suddenly, a sound coming from the bedroom door makes him turn in that direction. It is Giselle who appears, stating that he truly has become a Custoria. In front of him, the young woman apologizes for how she acted earlier, calling her behavior unacceptable for the family. Calmly, Luca responds that it was normal for a civilian to react that way given the whole situation. She then reveals that she also visited Felix, and that even he didn't recognize her. The soldier tells her she doesn't need to feel guilty, since Felix was only doing his duty, and denies that he is trying to comfort her. With a smile, Giselle compares him to a flame that burns brighter than any other. After the comment, she asks if he remembers what she had said about helping him if he entered the family. He soon confirms that he hadn't lied, approvingly thinking that this is how an imperial noble should act when claiming what is rightfully his. As she steps back, the young woman offers to give him some information as payment. Then Giselle activates a holographic panel, commenting that her father is not the type to lend a hand easily. Next, an image of the brothers is projected as she advises him to be careful with the two. She explains that his arrival puts pressure on the others, since the Custoria family is a lineage of soldiers. Unlike the others who have flaws as successors, the newcomer is already an elite soldier and therefore represents a threat to them. He soon agrees that it makes sense for the brothers to feel threatened by the possibility of losing their position to someone like him. Unexpectedly, he directly questions her about her own position, and her expression changes for a moment. Next, he asks if she has no interest in becoming the next head of the family, but she avoids answering. The heir states that she doesn't want to get involved in the fight, but will not stand still if provoked, warning that he cannot wait either. With that, she advises him to open the door if an opportunity knocks. The soldier then smiles and offers her the same advice as her new brother. At this, Giselle slightly opens her mouth. Right after, she bursts into loud laughter at the unexpected response. Once she composes herself, she asks if she can count on his support if her day comes. With a smile, he confirms that he will support her as long as he is not harmed in the process. She then extends her hand for a handshake, treating him as an ally and wishing good luck to the new brother. Soon after, she warns that this will be the first and last time she calls him that. He agrees, replying that it would be strange to hear her talk like that. Suddenly, bells ring in the background, announcing dinner time. Before the family crest, the two face each other with their newly formed alliance. In a large dining hall, the other family members are already waiting at the table. The doors open and the new member enters the hall accompanied by the daughter of the head. Seated are the second son Joel, the firstborn Nicholas, and the head's wife, Eva Custoria. The matriarch then addresses the newcomer to welcome him, stating that she has already heard much about him. The young man's expression remains serious as he stares at the woman leading the family. Finally, Eva asks everyone to sit, as her husband will arrive shortly, and Giselle agrees. Before taking his seat, the young woman discreetly whispers for him not to let her mother provoke him, since their father will not protect him from internal conflicts. With that, Himelas enters the room, and everyone at the table falls silent to receive him. The head of the house simply announces for everyone to begin eating. Before eating, Himelas opens the dinner with a formal greeting to the protector of humanity. He then concludes the greeting by thanking the first emperor of the empire. Soon, all others present at the table also begin the meal. While eating, the young man observes the family's behavior. With that, he realizes he is drawing everyone's attention at the table. The scene then returns to a few minutes earlier, when he and Giselle were still in the hallway. At that moment, the young woman was explaining that the fact the brothers felt pressured indicated they aimed for leadership. She then confirms that the two have probably already read all the information available about the new member. She reveals that Nicholas became a bureaucrat with many allies because he lacked aptitude for combat. As for Joel, even though he is less skilled, he has a better chance of becoming the successor because he is a soldier supported by relatives. Finally, she warns him to be careful, as the brothers will try to provoke him for any reason. Back in the present, he understands that this is why the two of them are watching him so closely. As he serves himself, he recalls the advice he received on how to act. He then begins cutting his piece of meat in silence. Looking at the table, he notices that Himelas is not eating. The head of the house finally brings his fork to his mouth, declaring that he needs to surpass his father's expectations. Meanwhile, the commander's daughter eats her meal in silence under the watchful eyes of the maids. Immediately after, Luca also eats his piece of meat with intensity. With a smile, Joel breaks the silence and calls his name. Hearing the call, the young man stops eating and stares at him to find out what he wants. Then the brother reprimands him, saying he didn't want to talk about that on their first meeting. With that, he criticizes his lack of etiquette, questioning how someone could have lived until now without knowing the basics. While being criticized, Luca analyzes the provocateur's behavior and the quietness of the eldest son at the table. From his observation, he concludes that Nicholas is the only one he really needs to be careful with. Joel continues his provocation, asking whether someone who has never received a medal in 10 years deserves the family name. With the provocation hanging in the air, the young man observes the table while considering the Custoria family's reputation. In response, he leans forward and stares directly at his brother. He then challenges him to test his combat skills, which he learned from an excellent captain, instead of worrying about etiquette. At the challenge, Joel reacts with surprise and grips the handle of his knife tightly. At that moment, Himelas intervenes in the discussion, ordering both of them to stop immediately. In his defense, the second son claims that he was only giving an example to the new brother. The head of the house then reprimands him, asking if he hadn't realized that Luca already knew proper etiquette. He soon reveals that he only pretended not to know and questions him directly to confirm. Instead of answering, the young man simply eats the piece of meat on his fork. After eating, he responds with a smile that he merely made a mistake. With that, he justifies himself by saying he got nervous because it was his first time in a place like that. Luca's answer causes a visible reaction on Joel's face. Soon after, Nicholas joins the conversation, mentioning the 7th rank crossed sword medal that the new brother received. He then admits he felt bad for not having become a soldier, but expresses happiness that his father found someone like him. With that, the second son questions him, taking the statement as criticism about not being a good soldier. Calmly, the eldest defends himself, saying he was misunderstood and that he is sure Joel will achieve great things in the future. Taking the opportunity, Luca also says that he felt bad over a similar situation. He then explains that his superiors felt pressured and avoided sending him into battle because of his father. The discussion continues and the tension between the brothers grows in front of everyone at the table. With each exchanged word, the family's conflicts became more evident, like old scars. Even so, he is certain that this scene was exactly what Himelas expected of him. As his new father, he understands that behind that serious expression, the commander was satisfied inside. Thanks to Eva's intervention, the conflict between the brothers ended, and dinner gave way to a peaceful banquet. During the event, the matriarch formally introduced him to the guests as the new member of the family, Lucas Custoria. With that, some people came to speak to him, already aware that he was not easy to deal with after the discussion with Joel. After reviewing some information with Giselle, his first day as part of the Cthia family finally came to an end. Back in his room, a sudden realization puts him on alert. Soon, the silhouette of a man materializes at the bedroom door. Approaching the bed, Himelas asks if he is awake. The veteran then apologizes for the late hour, but warns him that he needs to appear to be in a neutral position within the family. As he speaks, the head of the house sits in an armchair with a glass in his hand. With that, Luca expresses his surprise, remembering that alcohol has a negative effect on the nervous system used in combat. Himelas offers the drink, but the young man refuses, stating that learning Archi's Victima is already enough. Finally, the commander advises him as a veteran, saying that one needs a bit of impurity to endure for so long in that place. At that moment, Luca questions him about the necessity of humanity, since he called it the key to humanity's box. Remembering that those who think like that are the first to be devoured by the Legion, a drop of sweat runs down his face. Upon the suggestion that he is drunk, Himelas asks him to consider his advice as a gift for becoming family. As he stands up, the head of the family reminds him that this is not a battlefield and that he should find a hobby. Shortly after, he places a hand on his shoulder. With the advice given, he turns and leaves the room. Alone, Luca wonders how he can go after impurities when it is already so hard to pursue improvements. With that, he asks himself if the commander wants him to be like Kinuan, even knowing that irregularities can be caused by emotions. After standing up, he questions how the head of the entire Centurion could say those things to him. The visit with the advice about impurity showed a side he had never seen before. Finally, he concludes that he received a senseless piece of advice, acting like a normal father. On the second day at the Cthia house, Luca accompanied Giselle on a tour of the property, focused on his own plans. Soon, the young woman stopped in front of a door and, upon activating the panel, announced that they had arrived at their destination. As soon as the door opened, a bright light illuminated the young man's face. Before him was revealed a huge arsenal that occupied an entire building. With that, he asked if she was responsible for the place, and Giselle simply replied about her studies in engineering. Then she explained that the care of the armaments is a tradition among the women of the family, with her mother in command and herself as the successor. As they walked, the visitor commented that she didn't seem like the type to like grease, but soon heard about the matriarch's skill. Luca only listened silently while the young woman reaffirmed that all of that was an old family tradition. Next, she added that the arsenal showed how strong the Cthia family really was. When she called him, he was already standing further ahead, observing something under a beam of light. His attention was focused on an imposing combat robot that stood out in the place. As he approached, he noticed that the machine's body bore traces of various repairs. Soon after, he realized that the right arm was larger than the left, probably modified to hold a special weapon. Giselle then approached and asked if that was what was holding his attention. With that, she revealed it was the Scylla armor, a bodily relic of an ancestor of the Cthia family. She added that, although today it is considered inferior to a myrmidon, the armor remains a unique treasure to them. The sight of that combat robot remained etched in his mind. Later, while walking with Himelas, Luca asked why the elders lived so far away. With that, the commander explained that elders are only advisors, and the head of the family cannot be a puppet. Soon after, he announced that they had arrived at their destination. The two stopped in front of the imposing structure of the Silver Palace. Upon entering, Himelas explained that there are 7 elders in total, and that surviving to become one already proves their worth. Next, Luca wanted to know how many were against his adoption, and the commander revealed that 2 were against, 4 silent, and only 1 in favor. With that, he stated that most of his decisions are approved and asked him not to mind the opponents. Himelas only commented that the structure was more resistant than it seemed. Along the long corridor, both continued to advance in silence. In front of a large door, the head of the family activated the access panel with his hand. A gigantic rune covered by a dense fog revealed itself before them. From within the fog, the voices of the elders arose, questioning Luca's presence in the place. With his hand on the boy's shoulder, Himelas formally introduced him as Lucas. Before the thrones, the elders observed the young man and made comments about his capacity for survival. Soon, a voice coming from one of the thrones invited him to come closer. The boy then advanced alone through the fog. With a hand gesture, the elder insisted that he advance even further. The pressure of the moment became visible on his face. Finally, the young man stopped a few steps from one of the thrones. In a swift movement, the elder's hand reached out and touched the boy's face. The elder then wished him a long life, advising him to swallow the chaos rather than be carried away by it. Soon after, he commented on the invisible things now surrounding the young man. With the hand still on his face, Luca simply replied that he understood. Then he turned and walked away from the throne. One of the elders then changed the subject to succession, while another suggested that the visitor should leave first. Himelas remained silent beside the boy. Shortly after, the commander stated that it was fine for him to stay there. The unexpected display of trust made Luca look at him. With that, one of the elders yielded to the family head's wish and agreed to continue. At the end of the meeting, the two left the Silver Palace under the night sky. As they walked, Luca remained silent for a moment. Soon after, he broke the silence to ask the commander why he had allowed him to stay. Then, Himilus turned and said he would find the answer on his own. Thus, the last day in his new family's house was finally approaching. Preparing to leave, the young man opened his bedroom door for the last time. His departure, however, was immediately interrupted by an unexpected figure. A boy pointed a gun directly at him, asking if it was true that he could dodge bullets. The young man, Emilio, son of Nicolas, stared at him with no sense of danger. With that, Luca warned him to put the gun away, but the boy only mocked the threat while provoking him about his origin. The provocation caused no visible reaction. In an instant, Emilio pulled the trigger while the other moved to the side. The bullet hit the wall just behind, leaving only a trail of smoke in the air. Surprised, the boy then shouted that he shouldn't have dodged the bullet. Before he could react, Luca lunged forward and grabbed the gun with his hand. He then simply kicked him down the stairs. Down below, the boy cried desperately over what had happened. As he walked away, the older one just told him to go tell everything to his father. With the gun in hand, he completed the phrase, suggesting he say that his uncle tried to kill him. At that exact moment, Nicholas appeared running down the hallway, calling Emilio's name. Upon seeing his father, the boy began crying and calling for him. From the top of the stairs, Luca just silently watched the scene. The maids in the house also watched from a distance, without interfering. With his son in his arms, Nicholas looked up and called the young man's name. Soon after, he demanded an immediate explanation about what had happened. In front of everyone, Luca explained that he needed to discipline the boy for pointing a gun at an adult. Soon after, he added that he hoped Emilio would not repeat that behavior. At that moment, Nicholas turned to his son, asking if it was true that he had done that. Understanding the situation, he showed frustration with the boy's behavior, but quickly regained composure. Still, Luca interrupted him and asked if he would do nothing, since someone could have died. In response, the other suggested they talk alone for a moment. Both then proceeded to a private room to continue the conversation. Once inside, Luca simply waited in silence. As soon as he sat down, the older man began the dialogue by calling him by name. Soon after, he commented that others might think they were fighting. Even so, he was accused of using his own son to deflect suspicions of an alliance and warned about the risks. Unshaken, he coldly replied that he could simply have another son later. With a careless gesture, he suggested ignoring what he called a small problem. Soon, he revealed that he was already aware of the alliance with Giselle. Thus, Luca warned him that if he continued by the woman's side, Juke could become the successor. Still, Nicholas went on to explain that his life would be at risk if Juke took power. Sitting in front of him, the young man simply listened attentively. It was then that the other revealed that despite appearances, Jupe had considerable support and saw him as a stumbling block. He then lamented that neither he nor his rival possessed Himila's power. At that moment, Luca questioned why he felt pressured by someone without ability, but the answer did not come easily. Soon, it was mentioned that Jupe's military background guaranteed him support from part of the family. Further on, it was added that some also preferred a weak leader rather than someone with his father's power. The revelation made the listener understand that Himila's strength was the reason certain members sought a weaker successor. Then he recalled the meeting with the elders, reflecting on the true role of a leader. In light of that, he asked what Nicholas wanted from him, and the answer was that he needed an opponent to increase his popularity. In an instant, he understood that the whole plan, including the risk to the boy, had been orchestrated for that moment. Thus, he remembered Giselle's warning that Nicholas was the one who most resembled Himila's. Getting up, the man expressed that he hoped to have been understood, but the boy surprised him with a question. He wanted to know what would happen if he became strong enough to surpass the successor position. Without turning around, the elder simply replied that even in that case, he would still need an ally to maintain power. With a sharp smile, Luca responded that his question was not ironic. Nicholas then turned and reflected that, in the past, he believed nobles led a life without problems. As he walked away, the younger one offered to help, reminding that his position within the house was also the lowest. Finally, it was suggested that, to keep the promise made, Luca could tell everything about the conversation to Giselle. From the door, Nicholas shouted that he could keep thinking he was special, but that it would be difficult to be recognized as a Custoria that way. Luca just remained silent in the empty room. The conversation made him remember his own problems as he continued traveling. Soon after, the scene showed him and Himila's traveling together. Already in his uniform, the boy was looking at a card with the family symbol. By his side, the commander interacted with a holographic data panel. With that, the veteran asked if he had interest in the family, but the young man simply replied that it was nothing special. The lack of rest in recent days became apparent on his face. He then remembered how he tried to exceed expectations during his stay at the house. The memories contrasted Himila's image as a family man with the commander he knew. While holding the family card, his train of thought was suddenly interrupted. A strange and glitchy figure appeared on a panel, signaling interference in the system. Soon after, the entire vehicle began to shake violently. With that, a powerful impact hit the transport, throwing it off course. Suddenly, the young man realized the vehicle was being diverted in another direction. Himilas, however, remained calm and just asked him not to worry. Then the elder revealed that they had already planned for a possible attack and that traitors awaited them at the end of the route. With that, he indicated that support would arrive in 10 minutes and that they just needed to hold on until then. The boy then grabbed a weapon and prepared for the confrontation to come. The commander, however, corrected him and said they would leave the vehicle so as not to become an easy target. The suggestion surprised the younger one for a moment. Soon he understood that, in Himila's position, knowing how to pilot was an expected skill. Without hesitation, the commander went to the controls and opened an emergency exit. Next, he reassured his companion, explaining that the car would absorb the impact of the fall. While the transport fell toward the ground, Himilas called him to ask a question. As they fell, he asked what he thought of the situation. With that, the young man shouted that the commander was using himself as bait. Himilas then confirmed the plan, explaining it was so Barbara could gain the nemesis' trust. Soon, the commander warned him to prepare for impact, and the boy just shouted Barbara's name. The vehicle collided with the ground in a huge explosion. Amid the wreckage, fire and smoke rose into the air. Suddenly, the compartment door was thrown far away. Soon after, Luca emerged from the debris and confirmed he had managed to survive. Looking at the desolate area, he wondered if they could hold out the 10 minutes with nowhere to hide. With his hand on the boy's shoulder, the commander stated that the enemies saw the car falling and would arrive soon. The young man's gaze turned to the horizon, seeing Himilas also watching. At that moment, his eye glowed, showing he was ready. Far away, a space station orbited the planet in silence. Its vision showed the enemies approaching faster and faster. Grabbing his weapon, the veteran declared that the weather was perfect, then stood up to use it. Charging his power, he commented that he was finally using it, and after the full charge, fired a powerful shot sweeping everything in front of him. Seeing the overwhelming magnitude of the attack, Luca concluded it would not be necessary to prepare for the attack. Himilas made himself bait, knowing he could handle it alone, and said to pay attention because there was a chance to see him fighting. Facing the destruction, Himilas commented that more enemies survived than he expected. He informed Luca that his weapons system would identify all targets in 21 seconds. Then he fired another shot, devastating the area even more. The young man repositioned and questioned how it was possible since the enemies were not even in the field of vision. With that, he asked if the commander was using satellite coordinates for the attacks, and the suspicion was confirmed. Himilas then explained that, as leader of the Centurion, he has access to a military satellite for personal use. The explanation continues, detailing that operating equipment like this requires multiple computer systems. It becomes clear that the veteran is controlling everything alone, demonstrating the true power of a Centurion leader. Suddenly, he dodges a shot coming his way. Both observe that their enemies are approaching. Shortly after, a horde of opponents appears through the dust, and one of them shouts upon locating them. One of the mechanized soldiers yells orders to focus the attack on the commander and leave no trace of him. At the same time, a fighter with a sniper prepares to attack. Then he fires toward Himilas, who comments that he will take care of them. Soon after, he tells Luca to simply try to survive, but the young man complains that the order is too vague. Himilas then advises him, saying that to rise in life, he will need to learn how to understand orders like that. His voice echoes, warning that the world will not make things easy for the young man. While shooting non-stop, Luca wonders how this is possible. However, one of the hooded enemies easily deflects the bullets with his sword. The opponent's skill catches the commander's attention. The fighter then advances at high speed, ready to attack. With a smile, the more experienced one spins his body and prepares a counterattack. Then he moves quickly across the battlefield. Soon, he jumps onto the horde of adversaries waiting for him. With that, a single whirlwind strike hits all the enemies around at once. The commander then smiles with satisfaction. Luca watches the display of power with his bionic eye activated. He remembers he should pay attention, but the task proves difficult as he needs to defend himself. Thus, he understands that Himilas is not there to help or protect him. The moment an enemy attacks him, the young man recalls the warning that the world would not make things easy for anyone. His mechanical eye activates an aiming system, analyzing targets in a digital environment. Suddenly, a shot hits one of the traitors in the head. Without time to lose, he fights for survival. Soon, one of the opponents fires in his direction. While fighting seriously, the opponent, like him, manages to dodge the shot, making him wonder if the traitors can also use that technique. He continues, stating that fighting without a suitable body is the power of Archi's Victima, but that there is still a difference. Launching into a counterattack, he is determined that he must at least try, so he grabs the enemy's arm, leaving him confused. Then he delivers a blow that finishes him quickly. Luca then concludes that his move was unexpected, but a more skilled opponent would have cut off his arm. After the confrontation, he pauses for a moment to process the situation. From atop a pile of bodies, he sees Himilas finishing off the last enemy with his spear. As they approach, the commander turns to him and asks if it was already over. With a direct comment, he says that Rick was waiting to get injured in battle just to finish him off. Given that, Luca asks why they didn't set up an ambush and wait for Rick. The veteran then reveals that capturing the enemy wouldn't destroy the nemesis, would put Barbara at risk, and would waste their efforts. He then adds that he is just a replaceable piece, which shocks the young man with the idea of a leader being dispensable. As they walk away, the young man asks if there is anyone who is truly irreplaceable. With that, Himilas raises a finger and points to a large structure in the distance. He confirms that there is exactly one person with that importance, while Luca stares at the immense building. Then the commander states that the boy knows that person very well. The young man falls silent, absorbing the new and heavy information. He then begins to understand that, as long as it is to protect that person, it does not matter if others like him or even Himilas himself die, which makes him question his own usefulness. Even so, as they walk toward the structure surrounded by ships, Luca reaffirms to himself that he still belongs to the Empire. As Luca entered the main hall under the Empire's banner, all eyes turned to him. He walked through the place with a serious expression, aware of the attention he was receiving. With him, an identification card confirmed his new family affiliation. Two young men soon began whispering, questioning how he got the surname Custoria. Next, another group commented that even with the captain's affection, the adoption seemed excessive. For others, it was a miracle, but for the young man, the situation was uncomfortable. Soon after, Giselle passed by him and dropped an object on the floor while apologizing. He then stepped on the item, remembering that he joined Himilas to no longer be disposable. Still, upon seeing the card on the floor, he realized that his goal seemed impossible. Alone in the midst of the crowd, he understood that he would have to pay a price by risking his life to discover Kinuan's identity. Therefore, he decided to do everything he could until that day arrived. Thus, he started a combat simulation where multiple targets with alerts appeared around him. Amid intense training, he defended against all attacks with his sword. The routine consisted of training non-stop, connected to machines that monitored his body. At the end, the cycle was completed with robotic arms performing procedures while he rested. The procedures continued with mechanical arms applying improvements to his body while a monitor displayed his vital signs. After the process, he got up and analyzed the constant physical improvements he had been receiving. Next to him, a container full of used components revealed that less than a year remained until the end of his training. With that in mind, he decided that he needed to go to the lower sectors soon. His ultimate goal remained clear: to become an Imperial Guard, just as he had always dreamed. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Lile, who was seen arriving in front of a large and imposing Imperial building. Back at the facilities, Luca walked down a corridor leading to the restrooms. Upon entering, he heard two cadets commenting that, despite the smile, Ile's ambition never seemed normal. He approached and asked what had happened, discovering that the young man became the heir after defeating his own brother. One of the cadets added that Ile probably came for a psychological test, confirming that he had finally returned. Next, a plaque on the wall showed that Ile Kartika's status had been absent until that moment. Alone on the staircase, Luca reflected on the fact that the other had faced his brother for the title, even though he never showed interest. With a serious look, he realized the heir probably had not yet overcome the recent events. He then remembered Lilian Ramona's death and how Ile, despite giving his all, ended up losing her. The image of a gun firing appeared in his mind. He remained sitting on the stairs, recalling that her death was by Ile's own hands. The silence of the place was broken by a voice calling him. It was Ile himself, watching him from above with a smile. With that, he approached, commenting that he was moved, and asked if he should call him Lucas, but Luca corrected him, saying it was just Luca. Ile then said he would put away his backpack and asked for a moment, while Luca agreed. He watched his friend walk away with a slight smile. Once settled, Luca commented that he had heard Ile fought his brother and took his place. The other corrected him, explaining it was a formal duel and that he won because his brother was weak to provocations, leading Luca to ask what he did. With a smile, he revealed that he seduced the girl his rival liked, commenting it was easy since he was handsome. After saying he even felt sorry for his brother, Luca simply replied that he is trash. Ile then changed the subject, questioning how his friend was accepted so easily by the Custoria family. In response, Luca stated that his life had always been like walking a tightrope, and the current situation was no different. With that, he received a piece of advice: Even a juggler falls sometimes, but that doesn't mean the show should stop. Soon after, the hare stood and called his name to get his attention. Firmly, Luca declared that he no longer wanted to run from his problems. Immediately, Ela asked if this decision was because of that girl. Luca then explained his logic, stating that to solve his family's and the Empire's problems, he just needs to reach a position of power. He remained silent for a moment, convinced of his decision. Watching him, Ela recognized his friend's incredible abilities and concluded that if he already made a decision, there was nothing to be done. Luca then changed the subject, welcoming him and warning that he would also need to work harder. The two remained there, each with their own burdens and ambitions. Next, Ela extended his hand and proposed that they work hard together once again, because that is what they were there for. With a firm handshake, Luca agreed to the plan and confirmed his participation. As he was helped to stand, it became clear that his only task now was not to fall off the tightrope, since his partner had already proven his worth. Soon after, he descended by a panoramic elevator, observing the immense nighttime city below. Then he walked down a dark street, passing guards and heading to a lower sector of the metropolis. Upon arrival, he approached and saw two injured men sitting in a dark alley. Suddenly, a holographic screen opened, trying to initiate a call with Gabriel. One of the wounded quietly got up while Luca kept his gaze fixed forward. With that, the attacker's mechanical hand quickly reached toward his target's waist. With a violent tug, he ripped the opponent's arm off, who screamed in pain. The man then fled, stumbling down the alley, and Luca just watched him walk away. With a smirk, he commented that he was finally starting to feel at home. Then he looked at the communicator screen, wondering why Gabriel hadn't answered the missed call. He then entered a room, pausing at the door for a moment before proceeding, his gaze fixed on something on the floor of the dark room. As soon as he saw Gabriel's body on the floor, Luca concluded the call hadn't been answered because the man was dead. However, with difficulty, Gabriel opened his eyes and said he wasn't dead yet. As soon as the elevator opened, Luca stepped into an industrial corridor. Meanwhile, his expression remained focused as he approached his destination. Shortly after, he tested a new weapon attached to his mechanical arm. With that, the blacksmith turned to him and showed the prosthesis he had made, asking what he thought. Next, he picked up the new sword, commenting that the grip was firm and aligned well with the prosthesis, but the strength could be adjusted. Even without a detailed request, the craftsman delivered a weapon that seemed exactly what was needed for combat. Then the man introduced the blade, explaining its name was Cruxus, which meant calamity in the ancient tongue. Next, he revealed that the pistol was called Ruina, something like destruction. After explaining that feminine names required special treatment, the wielder of the weapons promised to make good use of them. The blacksmith said goodbye enthusiastically as the other left the place with his new arsenal. Now alone, he held the weapon, aware he would need something beyond his skills to fight someone stronger. After all, his old equipment hadn't helped last time and had been completely destroyed. Shortly after, he found Gabriel lying on a medical bed, badly injured and covered in bandages. Standing by the bedside, he just observed the contact's condition. Gabriel revealed he had taken 2 shots, one in the chest and another in the stomach, which meant they hadn't tried to kill him. When asked what happened, he explained the attack was a warning, as everyone in the area was increasing their forces. Soon after, he said they shot him as a message, leading Luca to ask why he didn't join a gang to survive. Gabriel retorted that he preferred to die rather than be a lackey, changing the subject to ask what the visitor was doing there after so long. Sitting in a chair, he answered vaguely that he needed to take care of some things. As he stood to leave, he said he would come back the next day and told the wounded man to take his medicine to get stronger despite the protests. Gabriel still tried to get his attention as he walked away from the bed. Outside, the city lights and its massive holograms filled the urban landscape. Among the crowd, the wanderer watched the information panels floating everywhere. With guards posted all around the hospital, he concluded Gabriel would be safe for now. With the contact secure, his attention turned to the next clue. The information received from Kinuan indicated the target was close to the former coliseum manager. To do that, he needed to find out what the guy had done back then, because he believed he would find the clue he was looking for there. Still, there was the question of what he would be doing in a place like that. From a vantage point, he looked at the urban landscape, a place of contrast. Then he climbed the stairs of a place that seemed to no longer hold any dreams. Standing under the lights, he tried to decipher why his target had come there. As he walked, holograms of giant fish floated silently through the alley. Suddenly, a memory made him stop abruptly. The image took him to the edge of an old building. It was then that he understood that, out of habit, he had ended up returning to the place where he was raised. With this new clarity, he hurried down another deserted street. Turning the corner, he spotted 2 men talking near a vehicle. Hidden, he heard one of them complain about yet another trick played by the director. The conversation led him to a window where several children looked out. The older ones seemed to know what the director was doing but couldn't act because they were weak. Faced with that scene, he understood that the world would not change by itself. Even if he did something, he knew relief for those children would be only temporary. After all, their situation would only improve for a few months before everything went back to how it was before. With that, the two men noticed his presence and asked what he was doing there. While one of them told him to get lost, he concluded that he had become too sentimental. Still, that was enough reason to decide to get involved in the situation. The orphanage director recognized him and, surprised, told his companion to back off. While taking a punch, he tried to say that the young man really had become a guard. After knocking him down easily, he just commented that he already had enough money. The director, desperate, tried to argue, reminding that he had always been good to him and even gave him extra food. Grabbing him by the collar, he replied that it was exactly why he hadn't broken his neck yet. Completely terrified, the man started crying and begging for forgiveness, pleading to know what he had done wrong. He only explained that he was passing through and what he saw annoyed him, ignoring the apologies and promises that it wouldn't happen again. While the other promised he would become a new man thanks to him, he just watched him silently. With the image of children smiling at the window in his mind, the decision was made. Without hesitation, he struck the director's face with a mega powerful punch. With the man on the ground, he adjusted his hood and warned him to feed the children properly the next day. Soon after, he turned and walked away down the dark alley. Later, when meeting Gabriel, Luca heard him loudly complaining about the pain he felt. Still protesting, the injured man reminded that he had taken 2 shots, while the other told him to be quiet and stop with the drama. In a moment of reflection, he admitted that only a good night's sleep had prevented him from breaking the director's legs. He also concluded that hitting someone he hated was good for his mental health, wondering if that was what Hamilas meant. Moments later, the two arrived in front of a large building identified as the Coliseum. At the entrance, a man approached them, asking Gabriel about the shots and noticing he had no fight scheduled. The young man explained they needed to speak with Aleph and that the matter was with his companion, not with him. Soon after, the security guard recognized Luca as the good boy, the fighter who wiped out his race, telling him to calm down. Ignoring the comment, the man used his communicator to inform that Gabriel was there with the good boy to see Aleph. Then he guided them up a staircase to the upper floor. In the room, Aleph welcomed them and, already aware of the rumors, asked Gabriel if he was okay after taking the shots. Luca commented on his friend's popularity, who retorted asking how he thought he had survived so long. Soon after, the host greeted him as good boy, but the visitor corrected him, asking to be called by his real name and inquired about his teacher. Upon hearing Aleph offer a match, he declined, explaining that the business was with him and that he wanted to talk in private. However, the other refused the request, stating he wasn't good at fighting and that his men were there for his security. With that, the ex-fighter boasted that the men who followed them were nothing but ants to him. The Coliseum's head then warned the challenger not to be arrogant just because he knew how to fight, saying he was crossing the line. In response, he just smiled and told him to obey. Aleph broke his cigarette and called him good boy again. The other just reminded him that he had already told him to call him Luca. Then the guards from the coast rushed at them. Quickly, he turned to Gabriel and ordered him to close the door. The guards then fired, forcing Gabriel to block the shots with his body. While dodging the gunfire, Luca hung from the ceiling, hoping they would stop shooting. From the door, his companion shouted for him to hurry up and finish it quickly. After landing, the enemies aimed their weapons at him, and one of them ended up hitting his own ally. Soon after, he crossed his arms and finished off the 2 henchmen. Sitting in his armchair, Aleph admitted that his security really had been useless. Later, the rain began to fall over the streets and the city's holograms. Water ran down the facade of an industrial building. Inside the place, Gabriel complained about the pain in his body because of the rain while being treated by Gilda. She teased him, asking if he knew his body wasn't waterproof, but he just replied sarcastically. While looking at the rain through the window, Luca concluded that the deal with Aleph hadn't been so bad. After all, his surname proved more useful than he expected in the negotiation. At that moment, the Coliseum's head recognized him as Lucas Castoria, son of the Imperial Guard captain. With that, he decided the risk was worth it and asked what he needed. The request was to obtain information about the man who killed the former Coliseum leader, something he knew was common in the streets. He made it clear that he wanted to know every detail, no matter how small. Back in the present, he said that Aleph had offered to become his servant after their conversation. Luca explained that upon reaching adulthood in a year, he would have the right to a servant, but before that, Aleph would need to prove his worth. While analyzing the report sent, he interrupted the conversation because it would give him clues about Kinuan. Then Gabriel asked why he would have to pay for an upgrade if his limbs were already waterproof models. The technician explained that the substance wore out over time, especially in the Akbaran rain, and needed to be updated every 6 months. He complained about the cost, saying he had never needed that maintenance before. While she warned him about the deterioration of the parts, he commented that it was normal to age, but the woman asked them to stop pretending. Without arguing, Luca left a chip on the table for her to make the necessary updates, including on his friend's body. With the chip in hand, the technician thanked him, saying he always saved them. Gabriel tried to warn him about Gilda, but was told to shut up, hearing that he knew nothing. The woman then turned around and asked if the homemade cookies were good, assuring him they wouldn't cause any problems. He just took a sip of his drink in silence. Sitting at the table, he analyzed the report, concluding that Aleph had taken control of the arena cleanly after the previous leadership disappeared. Since there were still survivors, he decided it would be worth trying to contact them. On the screen, the file of one of the remnants, Ken Noma, appeared, stating he was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. Suddenly, an explosion outside interrupted the calm. Shortly after, an armored vehicle descended a makeshift ramp amid the rain. Inside the car, Luca was behind the wheel as the vehicle landed abruptly. He then questioned the need for such a grand entrance since the target was in a hospital. Next to him, Gabriel complained that he hadn't healed yet and asked if he was hiding something, but he denied it. The memory of the man who attacked them came to mind, noting he was dressed like a gangster. The partner wondered if the shooter was connected to the gang that injured him, but admitted he had no idea how Luca saw the scene. After concluding that Gabriel was hiding nothing, he realized the real problem was that no one should know they were on their way. His expression changed as he noticed something, drawing his companion's attention. From atop a building, one of the shooters accused him of messing with Aleph and ignoring their warnings. From inside the car, Gabriel shouted back, denying any alliance with the Coliseum boss. The shooter retorted, saying they knew he went to make a deal right after being shot. With confirmation of the attack, it became clear the real target was Gabriel, and it would be necessary to find out why. Then he asked his companion for a weapon, explaining that his own was not suitable for use against civilians. While grabbing the weapon attached to his arm, he heard the other complain that he shouldn't carry something so powerful. Through the communicator, the enemy taunted, saying Gabriel made the wrong choice and that their sister just wanted to say hi. With the new weapon in hand, he aimed while calculating the shot, focusing on a point in the upper corner. His aiming system locked onto the target as he prepared to shoot. At that same moment, another shooter fired a heavy projectile in his direction. With a precise shot, the bullet intercepted the projectile midair, causing an explosion. With that, the main shooter was hit in the hand and screamed, not understanding what had happened. Quickly, he started shooting multiple times at the henchmen, causing them to flee. Watching the scene, Gabriel repeated the word sister, beginning to piece together the situation. Inside the car, the hospital security guard appeared and informed that reinforcements would arrive in 3 minutes. Luca then pointed out that the 3 minutes had already passed and suggested the man change his security detail, receiving thanks in return. With that, Gabriel approached and grabbed one of the fallen shooters by the collar. He asked if the sister was Martina, from the gang La Vie en Rose, who was hunting him for refusing to join the group. The captured man then revealed the true reason for the attack, shouting that the sister actually liked him. Next, he explained that she got furious because Gabriel refused her offer, and right after getting shot, went running to find Aleph. The man continued, saying Martina used the excuse of joining the gang just to get closer to the target. Luca then interrupted the conversation and told the man to let the woman know that Gabriel would see her soon, despite his protest. Still, he concluded it was better to resolve the situation, wondering if her interest could be useful since she was a gang leader. The possibility of using the scenario to his advantage sparked his interest. Shortly after, the vehicle arrived in front of the psychiatric hospital. Finally, they stopped in front of the room where Ken Noma was sitting with his back to the glass door. Soon after, the two entered the room. Luca then observed the patient, who was calm in his room. As he approached, he called him by name, confirming if it was really Ken Noma. Upon finding Ken Noma, Luca introduced himself and said he had a question about the arena manager. Even without getting a response, he closely observed the man's catatonic condition. Soon, Gabriel explained it would be useless, since Ken had been tortured to the limit and was now like a walking dead. With that, Luca prepared a temporary treatment used by the guards for damaged nerves, planning to use it on Ken. Next, he stated that his information showed Ken was fanatical about knives. Gabriel then asked them to leave, treating the situation as a waste of time, while the patient handled the blade. Ignoring the warning, Luca advanced with a quick finger toward him. However, the attack was blocked at the last moment by Ken's weapon. With the impact, the man's eyes showed a sudden clarity. Next, a rapid exchange of blows began between the two, releasing sparks with each movement. Quickly, Luca managed to stop the knife's advance by holding it with only 2 fingers. With his arm immobilized, Ken finally spoke, saying he felt like he was trapped in a swamp and confirmed his name. Soon after, he deduced that the visitor had some questions to ask him. Faced with Gabriel's surprised reaction, Luca said that now he only needed to keep the other's brain active. Maintaining the tension of the fight, He demanded to know about Tora's friends, but Ken Noma challenged him to give a good reason to talk. In response, Luca simply promised that he could get him out of that place. The offer of freedom immediately sparked Ken Noma's interest. Next, he turned to his partner and asked to shelter the man for a few days, explaining that he needed to gather trustworthy people. The proposal became even bolder when he suggested creating a gang, with Gabriel as the leader. Faced with refusal, Luca pressured him with the option of replacing him, which made him hesitate immediately. The need to have eyes and ears in the lower sectors, something only his partner could not provide, justified the creation of the gang. With the deal sealed, he returned the knife to the new ally. Accepting the proposal, Ken Noma warned he had little time and prepared to tell the story Luca needed to hear. As the scene shifted to a moving vehicle, a new understanding of the facts arose for him. The revelation was that Tora had a longtime friend who helped him secretly, without belonging to any gang. With that, the truth was revealed. Just as Luca used Gabriel, Kinuan had formed his own secret organization using Tora as a front. Kinuan's method was to recruit trusted allies to carry out unofficial missions behind the scenes. This realization made him wonder if, by following the professor's tracks, he was not replicating the same actions. Standing before an imposing building, he concluded that although he had a new lead, the whole situation was still insufficient and very complicated. The mission led him to the vast data bank room, a place full of servers. Soon after, he approached a terminal and began his research on a floating screen. The search confirmed his suspicion. Tora's downfall coincided with the date Kinuan became a professor. Despite the discovery, his instructor's goals remained a mystery, and Luca decided he needed to help Ken recover. With that, he considered the risk that Gabriel might also fall if the gang grew too large, a fate similar to Tora's. A new perspective arose by understanding that Kinuan did nothing wrong, since it was thanks to him that Tora succeeded. His old master's method became clear. He balanced interests by keeping a safe distance to lead any relationship. This strategy existed to ensure there would be no hesitation in making sacrifices, including even the strongest and most precious allies. The whole tactic aimed not to lose direction amid chaos, and above all, to survive. Suddenly, he directly questioned what he wanted. Showing himself present, Kinuan gave the disciple due congratulations. Meanwhile, he said all he wanted was for him to finally understand the fundamentals of Archi's Victima. Next, he declared that the next step was to continue the plan and become someone like him. At the training center, he observed the student from a distance while drinking from a flask. Shortly after, he comments on the surprising ease with which Luca reached the Mista level. Not understanding the term, he hears the explanation that a Mista is someone who can teach Victima arts, and that users were once divided by hierarchies. Despite the information, he dismisses the subject, stating that this practice has been practically extinct. With a suspicious look, Luca says he doesn't believe he was called there just for that. He then warns the mentor to hold back and not provoke him, reminding him of his well-known bad mood. With that, Kinuan states that, as always, it is easier to learn in practice than through words. As he stands up, Luca concludes that, even though he is a master in Archi's Victima, his opponent still has physical limitations. He then adds that the veteran will not be able to defeat him with that body. Suddenly, energy concentrates in the instructor's hand. Next, he warns the student to protect his head and torso, while the latter notices a subtle change in his adversary. He realizes that Kinuan only switched his right arm and admires the control that prevented him from noticing the difference in weight and sensation. Even knowing the risk of using a high-power cybernetic piece with damaged nerves, a cruel smile crosses his face. While observing his own cybernetic arm, he understands that he might never have a chance like this again. In a combat stance, he thanks the master, treating him as his teacher. With the vast space between them, the great distance marks the start of the confrontation. Shortly after, Luca falls to the ground, admitting to himself that he was defeated. Even having a great advantage in the fight, he doesn't understand how Kinuan managed to stop his attacks with that arm. As he recovers, he questions whether his opponent can see the future, but the latter denies having that ability. Then Kinuan explains that Archi's Victima techniques are learned by stealing them, and that Luca needs to use his brain's resources. With that, he ends the lesson, saying they will continue in the next class and dismissing the student. The image of Ken Noma appears in his mind, reminding him of his mission. As he stands up, he concludes that to take the next step, he will have to learn some things alone, knowing it will be difficult. Contrary to being dismissed, Luca offers help to support his teacher. While supporting him, Kinuan says he will owe him one, and Luca simply accepts. With that, he reflects that the person who knows everything is right beside him. The drink left on the bench reinforces the rule that both he and Kinuan followed, maintaining a certain psychological distance. During the journey to the office, Kinuan suggests that Luca try a relationship before changing his body, and he just replies that he will see what to do. This brief conversation makes him admit to himself that it would be a lie to say that this relationship doesn't hurt him. The The reason for that is the certainty that, one day, they will inevitably have to part ways. At least one last wish remains in his mind, not having to deal with Kinuan with his own hands. Although they were hidden cybernetic mercenaries laughed around a table. As Luca approached, his companion warned him that those men would do anything for money. Because of that, he grabbed him by the collar and complained that he needed useful people, not that kind of crowd. Then Gabriel explained that Ken Noma was in a room on the second floor, but it had been costly to get him out of the hospital. Soon after, the chip was delivered by Luca, who asked to save it, and the other simply agreed. As he walked away, the sponsor instructed Gabriel to tell the men that he was behind the operation and that they should take the job seriously. At the same time, in the second floor room, Ken Noma sat on the bed. When entering the place, Luca hears Gabriel saying that his name should still be on the hospital's list. Furthermore, Gabriel continues, explaining that visitors won't discover anything except for guards and nurses. After hearing the information, a slight smile appears on the face of the newcomer. With that, he grabs a vial and inserts it into an injection device. Then he approaches with the injector in hand. Suddenly, a knife is thrown toward the man in front of him. Soon the question is asked directly, asking if Ken Noma knows who he is. With the blade in hand, Ken confirms that he recognizes him. Next, he stares at the visitor, stating that he is someone trustworthy. Now with the knife in his possession, Luca invites him for a conversation. Meanwhile, Gabriel is suddenly surprised by the fierce exchange between the two. Without hesitation, the man who was on the bed attacks fiercely. However, with an agile movement, the other manages to block and soon realizes that the opponent must have been very good back in the day. Shortly after, he manages to force a step backward. With the impact, the ex-patient staggers back to the bed. Even without understanding, he asks what was done. Since his mind feels clearer, the interlocutor simply replies that he mixed and applied some medicines, then is questioned about his knowledge. Next, Luca reveals he is following the trail of the man who sponsored Tora. But before saying more, Ken asks for a cigarette and alcohol. After receiving what he asked for, he advises the other to relax, commenting that he looks like a soldier. With that, he finally remembers that Tora called him Noel. He continues, explaining that Tora would not take care of something as big as the arena, concluding it must have been because of that man. Curious, Luca asks what happened, and Ken responds that part of the arena's money was being diverted. Before continuing, he says he wants to ask one thing. With that, the visitor immediately deduces the request is about Aleph. Ken then confirms and reveals that he still wants to take revenge for the state he was left in. However, the other refuses, explaining that he and Aleph are business partners and that the matter should be ignored. Next, he reminds that he is under Gabriel's gang protection and will be able to take revenge when he gets out of there. Even so, Ken interrupts him and guarantees that he keeps his word, unlike the other man. Luca just listens and thinks how everyone who betrays says the same thing. His gaze then turns toward Gabriel in the background, knowing whom to trust. Suddenly, the mention of Tora's records makes his eyes widen. The informant explains that Aleph must have the records and instructs him to look for companies starting with the letter B, since the money that went through them went to Noel. As he receives this information, he realizes something is happening outside. Gabriel approaches and asks what is going on. Before them, a woman steps on the head of a fallen mercenary and questions if they thought they could defeat her. She addresses Gabriel and says he needs to train his subordinates better. With that, he asks her why she invaded the place like that. Going down the stairs, Luca asks why she appeared, and the woman justifies that it was sudden and that she has things to resolve. The two then stare at each other silently for a moment. Soon after, Luca asks if she can just show up and cause trouble. Faced with the accusation, she admits her mistake but asks if it wouldn't be better to have talked beforehand. Then Luca orders the men to take care of everything while he and Gabriel leave, forbidding them from drinking. Next, the three walk through the city lit by holograms. As they walk, Gabriel explains that La Vaillant Rose is a gang created to protect women. He continues saying most members were born there and that the gang leader is also a woman. Curious, Luca asks if they have met, but the other replies he saw her during an old security job. Gabriel then brags about her appearance to him, while his companion just observes. At that moment, he thinks Aleph might betray him if their interests aren't aligned. Now he knows Gabriel is an irreplaceable piece for him, so the woman announces they have arrived at their destination. Upon arrival, the group faces the imposing facade of the Serene Sea Pavilion. Right at the entrance, the woman calls Gabriel and makes him ask if she wants to fight again. Before a large door, she warns him not to refuse the lady this time. Next, she says only then will he be able to survive. As the door opens, Luca notices a strong red substance filling the environment. Suddenly, his expression changes as he understands what is happening. With that, he quickly finishes off a girl, realizing they want to neutralize his senses. Next, he announces he will blow the head off whoever moves. One of the guards tried to react but was severely wounded with a shot to the head. Then a woman holding a fan reveals herself behind the smoke, asking them to stop. Thus, the head of the place questions who gave them permission to be arrogant with her guests. Soon after, one of the subordinates apologizes to her lady for what happened. As Gabriel gets angry about the situation, Luca intervenes and asks him to stay calm. He then explains they only came to talk but understands she wants to get rid of him without dirtying her own hands. Next, the woman apologizes for her subordinate's loyalty and directly asks Luca's name. After introducing himself, he is asked what he does in the lower sectors, but he replies it is none of her business. The lady then informs him that he seems not to understand how things work, revealing that he is in La Vie en Rose. With that, Luca laughs while she warns him that he is very mistaken if he thinks nobility guarantees any safety in that place. The hostess watches him angrily from behind her fan, as the visitor comments that they think there's something just because they stick together in groups. Seeing her reaction, the subordinate approaches and asks her lady to calm down. The servant leans in to speak with Martina, while Luca watches from afar. With a quick movement, the lady closes her fan. Shortly after, Martina turns around and orders them to follow her. As the group is led inside, she warns that she will get straight to the point. Sitting in her room, she reveals that the only thing she wants is to date Gabriel. Surprised, Luca then questions why a woman like her would be interested in him, since with a pretty face you can get anything. Gabriel mutters that he hates being under someone's wing, but Luca corrects him, explaining that he is just a sponsor, not his boss. Then the young man emphasizes that Luca is not his boss, provoking a reaction from the hostess. Luca then suggests that Gabriel date her for a while, since it wouldn't be a problem to balance that with work. Not understanding the refusal, he asks what the problem is, and Gabriel reveals that the real issue is that she is much older than him. At that moment, Luca realizes she is even older than his companion's grandmother. Gabriel stammers that he'd rather die than accept it, even admitting she's still physically very well. With that, Luca just puts his hand on his head in front of the impasse. Next, he reveals that Gabriel now has a gang, and therefore can no longer enter La Vie en Rose. Luca adds that, thanks to the good relationship with Aleph from the arena, they won't have trouble establishing themselves. Still, Martina confidently states that she has never lost a man she desired before. He provokes her, saying that then this will be her first time, and that it's rare to have a first time at her age. Ignoring the comment, she turns to Gabriel and promises she can give him things beyond imagination. Soon after, she looks at the young man seriously and asks, please, that he stay with her. Faced with the proposal, Gabriel just clenches his teeth and begins to sweat, embarrassed. Amid the tension, everyone remains silent, waiting for the next move. The woman then sighs and declares that given the refusal, she has no other choice. With that, she changes the subject and suggests they talk business, asking why they want a gang. She states she doesn't intend to become enemies with someone as brave as Luca, leaving Gabriel confused by the sudden change. Then she mocks the young man and reveals she usually has a thing for ugly guys. Laughing cruelly, she calls him a pathetic man and says that just thinking of him at her feet gives her chills. Seeing his partner humiliated, Luca comments that it seems it's not just nobles who have strange taste. Shortly after, the woman composes herself and suggests they resume the business conversation. The scene shifts to the display of a holographic advertisement for the local fighting arena. Elsewhere, Aleph comments that Luca is a smart boy for already doing business with La Vie en Rose. He then narrates that after the meeting with Martina, he went to Aleph to ally Gabriel's gang with the arena and La Vie en Rose. Thus, with the rumor spreading, no one would stand in their way and talented people could join them. Luca reveals he knows Aleph was subordinate to Tora and hopes he continues acting the same way. Back on the streets, holograms float over pedestrians' heads. Martina's subordinate asks if he really trusts the ally, and the answer is that she must be blind to think otherwise. Luca then comments that it's hard to trust anyone, as people are unpredictable. He remembers that Martina offered to lend one of her girls, revealing that the ex-soldier is quite experienced even without having finished training. He quickly realizes the leader wants to discover his identity, but concludes that the girl is more useful than the idiots in the gang. Since she agreed to take care of security, he sees no loss in the deal until the young woman asks if he comes from a military family. After questioning why, she explains it's because he is strong and too young to have defeated her so easily. He comments on her confidence, but the woman says she didn't leave due to lack of skill, as she was the best student in her battalion. Luca then asks why she left, but the girl refuses to answer, saying they aren't close enough to talk about personal things. With that, he decides to end the matter, but she insists on escorting him to the end. Before leaving, the young woman teases him, saying he is no stronger than she is, and says goodbye formally. Then he just watches as the woman walks away. Alone in an alley, he recalls that Ken told him to look for companies starting with the letter B in Tora's books. With that, he could trace Noel, a pseudonym he suspects was used by Kinuan. Analyzing the data in front of him, he discovers all those companies closed years ago. He soon realizes he needs a more reliable database since the current system is corrupted with false data. The only solution that comes to mind is to access the Imperial data system. Even knowing the line is expensive, he decides there is no other way and initiates the call. As soon as the call connects, a voice greets him, saying he has been very busy. Next, Nicholas suggests they get straight to the point. The request to access the Imperial database is made, but when denied, he proposes investigating some closed companies. Nicholas then asks if that will help his reputation in the family, and the confirmation comes next. With that, the man agrees to help and asks for the list, promising an answer in 2 hours and saying brothers should help each other. After hanging up, disdain for the brothers' false camaraderie is inevitable. He decides not to think about the price of the favor, as his mission is the only priority at the moment. At that moment, he reflects on all the alliances he had to form with Aleph, Ken Noma, Gabriel's gang, and La Vion Rose. The whole night was consumed in negotiations, which makes him dizzy. Exhausted, he throws himself on the bed, thinking the worst thing that could happen would be a call from his new father. He buries his face in the pillow, wishing just a few moments of peace. However, his only hope is frustrated when a message notification appears, sent by Nicholas, showing that his mission is not over yet. While looking at the mission report, Luca wonders how many of them Ela participated in during his absence. The protagonist then realizes that his colleague has been volunteering for non-mandatory missions, which explains why he hasn't seen them. With that, he recalls the moment when Ela said that from that day on, he would stop running away. Faced with the memory, he decides he should go see him. Checking the status, he discovers he is resting in his personal repair room and seems to be free. Just as he was thinking of going, a woman approaches and asks if he has already heard the news. Next, she reveals that Ela went crazy with the missions and warns that way he will end up losing his first place. Unshaken, the protagonist just turns and replies with a simple "we'll see." Immediately, the girl teases him, asking if his confidence comes from having been adopted by the Custoria family. Upon hearing he should relax, he reflects that they know absolutely nothing. In a flashback, he remembers how easy it is to pull a trigger when acting under orders, without needing to judge which side one is on. Now, however, he needs to do everything alone, not knowing whom to trust and suppressing the urge to give up. Even missing the past, he reaffirms that this was his choice and that if he fails, he will be eliminated. His only goal to survive is to solve his own problems to become like figures such as Kinuan or Hylas. Seeing his reaction, the woman apologizes for judging him, admitting she was only worried because she hadn't seen him around. He reassures her, saying that this is now his power, the strength and prestige he always dreamed of. He also comments that everything starts with small steps, until the nobles start paying more attention. Next, he reveals that he hasn't slept for a few days. Even so, he states that being a noble is not so easy, but he will keep rising no matter what. With that, he walks down the corridor toward the personal repair room. Upon entering, he finds Ela lying inside a maintenance capsule. As soon as he notices him, the blonde greets him, and he just replies his name. Observing his colleague's damaged hand, he notes it seems to have been through a lot. He then comments that he heard Lord Kartika is very active, but Ela replies that it's nothing compared to him. He recalls the warning that he could lose first place, concluding he might be weaker than the other now. He reflects that he wasn't joking, but that it's better to start thinking about the next stage of his fighting style. As the blonde stands up, he teases him, asking if being his friend has advantages since he was sought after. The teasing is met with a simply affectionate manner. Already getting dressed, Ela calls him to come with him. Then he says he will show him everything he has gained so far. Inside a laboratory, a mechanical beast floats suspended in a containment tank. Upon seeing the creature, Ela asks if it's not cool, while Luca finally understands why he was feeling so confident. He recognizes the creature as an animal from the planet Novus, hard to capture, and concludes that his friend really evolved. The protagonist then questions what the beast has to do with the arcane civilization, and Ela replies that, although nothing is confirmed, there seems to be a connection. Soon after, he explains that, although made of metal, the beasts have a complex structure and can reproduce and evolve on their own. Meanwhile, the blonde touches the glass with a smile on his face. The focus shifts to his smiling face in his memory. The protagonist asks if it's possible to tame these things, but the researcher responds that there is no correct answer due to lack of precedent. Back on the balcony, Luca asks what will happen to the mechanical beast. Ela then reveals that it may be his last chance to see it, as the creature will be transported to the Royal Palace's research department. With that, the other concludes that the beast will probably stay there. The companion just smiles sideways upon hearing the comment. Suddenly, Ela shows him a dagger, revealing that he also managed to get that. He identifies it as a ceremonial knife for commanders, made from the bones of an extinct animal and impossible to replicate. Luca then questions whether the weapon can be used in battle since it's made of bone, and the friend asks him to hold it firmly. In a quick move, Ela attacks and the strike is blocked with a knife. Holding the weapon, the protagonist comments that he thought it was unique. Suddenly, the dagger starts releasing energy over the blade. With a smile, Ela reveals that it is a gift to celebrate the fact that Luca might be the heir to the Custoria family. He then explains that the weapon's name means always white, and that it is not such a simple gift. Even without knowing if he's being teased, the other hears Ela assure that he's being sincere. Silently, the protagonist accepts the dagger offered to him. Under the city sky, he promises to make good use of it. Back in his room, he enters holding the new gift. Finally, he observes the dagger he just received. He reflects that, in a universe destined to disappear, our lives are just a fragment of insignificance. Despite that, he thinks that prestige, life, and relationships are things that must continue until the end. Then he admits to himself that he's getting sentimental, but that there's nothing to be done. The protagonist then recognizes that this is the first sincere gift he has received in his whole life. A moment later, with a smile, Luca acknowledges that Nicholas really knows how to do a good job.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.